Hi everybody, this is the vBrownBag build day. We are absolutely live here from Houston. We're doing the HPE SimpliVity solution this week, and joining me to be my systems engineer for the day, he's been my systems engineer for the whole week because we've been here for a while, is Marcel Guerin. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you, Alistair. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here today.
Can you just fill the folks watching in on what your role is with
Sure.
HPE?
So I've been with HPE. Well, I started with SimpliVity in 2015, so I just crossed over 2 years. Now transitioning into a hybrid IT solution architect role.
Excellent.
So my background, storage, backups, virtualization, covering a number of technologies in those categories, both pre-sales as well as hands-on and implementing those technologies in customer environments.
So you're out there with customers actually doing the deployments and going through.
I am as much as I can, but my first task is to be out there in the field doing field sales. So, but I do enjoy getting hands-on because that's where you learn things.
It is indeed.
You learn how things really work.
And we should also mention a little bit about the location that we're in right now. We're, say, in Houston with HPE. This is the Americas Solution Center, is
The
it?
Americas Solution Center, that's correct. So we have a tremendous amount of resources and expertise here to effectively achieve any kind of proof of concept or application testing at scale across all kinds of technologies. So they're a really neat place.
So we're sitting in a conference room, and it's a nice large conference room in here, which is really nice for us because sometimes we're quite crammed in. And behind us, right through this wall, is a big data center. So this meeting room opens directly onto the data center floor, and there's rows and rows of servers out the back. It's not quite your typical data center because lots of things come and go from here as those different solutions are being built out.
That's correct. It's a pretty dynamic environment, and you can see from the whiteboards on the wall that this is a workroom, right?
Yeah. We've been in this room for the week, working out what we're going to show, working through the issues. Yep. And the other thing is that it is a live data center out there. This is a building that was affected by Hurricane Harvey, so there's been flooding through the building and there's remedial work still going on. And so you may hear some noises through the stream as the workmen are working at the moment on the power distribution.
No pun intended.
But yes, there may be some interesting sounds as we go through, but that'll be nothing that's unfamiliar to most of you who've worked in data centers before. I wanted to also say hi to Jeffrey. Jeffrey is, of course, sitting behind the cameras, making all of the magic work. How you doing, Jeffrey? You feeling comfortable?
I'm doing great. Welcome everybody to the Build Day Live. And I wanted to add one thing, and that is our scene. We're in the conference room, but we've got this beautiful scene that I'm going to show everybody right now. All these photos are HPE employees have taken these photos and they put on the wall. So these are all of people's trips in different places, and it looks great. And thank them very much for making us look good as best as we can. And so thank you very much for coming to the Build Day, and I hope you soak up all the information that comes in here and go from there. So let's take it back to Alistair and Marcel.
Great, and let's just very briefly set the scene of what we're going to do here. And I got a single PowerPoint slide that shows a little bit of the progression. And as usual, I travel with a Pelican case full of computer equipment to do these things. And what I brought with me is essentially a 3-node vSphere environment. So I've got a single Intel NUC, which is that management that's in the top left. That runs the virtual center and domain controller and all of those other little bits. And then on the right, I've got a couple of Xeon D machines, 128 gigs of RAM and a couple of SSDs in them, and that's the workload cluster where we've got virtual machines that are actually running. The general run that we're planning to do is to deploy out a cluster that I'm going to call production, which is a 3-node SimpliVity cluster, and we'll move some workloads off that local cluster into the production cluster and see the results of that. So currently we have 3 nodes waiting to be deployed for the production cluster. And then we'll have a second SimpliVity cluster for disaster recovery. So we've just got a 2-node cluster for that. So that's roughly what we're going to do through this time. and build out what SimpliVity call a 3+2 configuration.
That's correct.
3 nodes in one data center and 2 nodes in another, often used as this disaster recovery kind of configuration.
In SimpliVity speak, when we talk about a federation configuration, it's the number of nodes in each data center. That way you can distinguish a 3-node SimpliVity solution that's all HA, as in your production cluster, is a 3 plus whatever, versus a more common deployment scenario, which would be 2 nodes for HA in one data center and 1 node for DR. That would be a 2+1.
So that'd be a smaller scale customer that doesn't need the capacity.
Customer that doesn't need HA and DR and doesn't need as much capacity.
And as usual, we'll have a series of pre-recorded video segments that delve more into the technical details. And also, as we go through, we will be talking about that as well. So Marcel and I will talk through some of the technical pieces, but we've also got some recorded segments. And one of the nice segments that we'll play early is that that 3-node cluster actually came as a factory direct configuration. And in the previous HC380 video, we showed you how nice a factory direct install looks once it's on the floor and in use. But we actually got the great joy that the factory direct configuration had actually been delivered to this data center before Harvey, and we got to unbox it. And so we'll play that video as well and show what it looks like to be the customer who receives the factory direct configuration.
That's correct.
All right, well, I think that's enough introduction to what we're going to do. We should start actually doing something.
Cool.
So I've got at the moment the lab environment here. So I've got a Windows 7 machine that runs in that local cluster. You can see my 2 hosts, host 1 and host 2. As usual, the build in there is based on an Autolab build, so the names and IP schemes all match up from that. And I've got a few virtual machines, so there's Ubuntu and Win 2012 and Win 7 VMs are all running on there. And I've got a couple of VApps as well. One of the things we've seen in this deployment process is that it takes quite a while for each of the SimpliVity nodes to be configured up. And so we want to get fairly fast into the point where we can do that. Marcel, what's the usual process before this? What does the engagement look like as we go through this?
So you're catching us kind of at step 4 of 4, right? So the first step, we typically have a kickoff call with the customers involved, the partners involved. We have our remote deployment team, which consists of a deployment project manager and a deployment engineer. They're on the call, and if I can be on the call, I am as well. We basically talk about the plan for deployment. Are we going into a new federation? Are we creating a new one? What does it look like? Time frames, etc. That's the first call. It takes about an hour. The second call, we review all of we call it the pre-flight information. So you can think of this as all of your networking IP stack information that we plan to use for the deployment. We have an online form that gets filled out and requests all the requisite information. And so we have a quick call to review that, what we call pre-flight. So that calls either about 15 minutes if we've done our homework before the call, or about an hour if we haven't, and we're kind of working through that on a call. The third step is actually run by our deployment engineer, and that would be a validation pre-deployment check. So we're going to, the deployment engineer will remote into the environment, make sure that we can ping all the correct IPs, make sure that we can't ping the correct IPs, that what we've identified as a time server responds to time queries and DNS, the appropriate records have been created, software versions are staged and ready to go, and it's sort of our our last check before we go live with the deployment, which is kind of where we're at right now, which is the actual deployment.
Because then after the third call is when things are put in racks and cabled and
actually before the third call. Okay. So we need to have we want the systems to be in place and so that we're validating the actual deployment environment prior to. And so where we're at now is, so that pre-deployment check typically takes about 1 hour, and then we're at the actual deployment now, which we schedule usually 1 hour per deployment plus 1 hour per node. But as we'll find out today, it typically goes much faster than that.
Okay. And so we're here ready to do that deployment. What's the first stage of deployment in here?
Well, the first thing that we want to do is we're going to create a target cluster for us to deploy the nodes into. So I noticed that you didn't have a target cluster created, so let's do that.
Let's just do a standard new cluster.
Just a standard cluster. Don't enable HA or anything of that.
This one is going to be called production. Later. Of course, I have to be able to type correctly. Nice empty cluster in the inventory.
Empty cluster, and then We can go ahead and create a data center for disaster recovery and put a DR cluster in that, and we can get this out of the way.
Oh, what am I going to call this data center?
The other side,
Okay.
the far side.
And I'm just going to call it far side to avoid, no, I've got to call it the far side to avoid any sort of copyright
Okay, let's
issues.
not get any lawyer calls.
And then what you want me to
And then let's
build
create a
new
cluster there.
in there. And I'm just calling it DR to differentiate it.
There you go. And now we've taken the step to proactively install the everything that you do to manage SimpliVity operationally is done through vCenter. So we have a plugin that manages that. We've already installed that on the vCenter host. Now we need to deploy a piece of software that we call the Arbiter. The Arbiter acts as a cluster witness to the cluster. And so that's a small piece of software that we install off of the SimpliVity systems. The next thing we need to do is install the deployment manager itself, which will do the actual deployment.
Where would we normally deploy the Arbiter software?
So typically we're going to deploy the Arbiter software usually in that pre-deployment check, but sometimes it's the first step.
So which server would we put it on?
We're going to put it on vCenter.
We'll put it on vCenter alongside the...
We have a vCenter that's going to be outside of the SimpliVity infrastructure. If we were putting vCenter on SimpliVity, then we would have somewhere else for the Arbiter. It can be a domain controller, a Windows system, somewhere, doesn't matter.
Okay, so as in one of the earlier calls, we made sure that we had downloaded all of these things. And then I've got the Arbiter installer here. And of course I agree to the license agreement.
Biggest lie in the universe.
And it's a pretty quick install.
There we go.
It's done. And then we should really validate that the service that it creates is present and running.
That's correct.
Although it will be obvious as we go through whether it is or not. And then we have a SimpliVity Arbiter service, which is running in automatic.
Very good. So then our next step will be to deploy the actual deployment manager application. This is on a Windows system. This will send command and control to the nodes. So we're not actually moving any bulk data over the network between the deployment manager application and the nodes. The nodes actually come, you mentioned the factory integration. Part of that factory integration process is making sure that the ESXi versions that we're going to install are already prepared on those nodes.
Right.
This makes it very efficient to deploy into remote office, branch office. We had a customer that did a deployment actually and a data migration 200 miles offshore on a rig. So
that's a pretty serious
pretty
scale.
serious environment.
I just wanted to also call out in here the plugin that we've already installed. So it's just a Windows application, and in this case that runs on the Windows-based vCenter server because I'm using the Windows vCenter server. But you've also got this run file, which I'm assuming is to install the vCenter server appliance, which of course is now the primary vCenter deployment method, and might have saved me some of my pain.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to leave the vCenter server alone, return to my Windows 7 desktop here, and go find that same install folder. SimpliVity downloads, and I've got my deployment manager here.
There is a question in the chat already. Can it be installed on the VCSA rather than the Windows vCenter?
So I think
the plugin itself can be installed either on the Windows vCenter or the virtual appliance.
But the Arbiter
is Windows-based, assuming it was the plugin. Or the Arbiter.
Yes, timing on the questions is always a challenge, but we have two things we could have deployed.
That's correct.
Yeah,
all right.
We definitely want to thank people like HomeSkillet64 for being in the chat.
Thank you for the question.
Definitely bring your questions, ask them in the chat. We've got people watching, so we can answer them as well. All right, now the deployment manager is installed on my desktop.
There we go. So now we're going to log into vCenter.
vc.lab.local. And the other thing we pre-created was a service account. I've chosen to create a service account so it was really obvious when we were using the service account versus doing something manually. So I created a service account that is an administrator in my inventory. What sort of privileges do we actually require in the inventory to run this?
That's a good question. Probably administrative roles, because we're going to be creating objects and deploying things into them, but we can get an answer to that, a more specific answer to that. It's not in the documentation.
So we'll log into our vCenter, and one of these days I will type the password correct.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
That's the highly
9.
secure password.
Oh, yeah.
It's the kind of password an idiot puts on his luggage. All right, so let's pick our, we're going to deploy a production node first.
I think it seems sensible to deploy a production
I think so
node,
too.
start
So
some
let's pick the
migrations.
production cluster. You can see we have the steps outlined that we're going to go through on the left. So we're going to create a new federation, and the SimpliVity Arbiter is running on the vCenter server, so we can go ahead and use that. And we haven't saved the file, so
Yeah, so we haven't
one
got
of the
one to
things
load.
that we can do is save ourselves some typing, and sometimes is I've seen situations where duplicate IP exists that we didn't catch in that pre-flight or something. It's really helpful to just
Save the
populate
configuration.
those values directly. So here we're going to pick the node that we're going to deploy to. So our nodes have 2 10 gigabit Ethernet ports that are cabled up, as well as 2 1 gigabit ports. And all of those networks that they're on have a DHCP server. So what will happen is we'll see our servers listed 4 times each. And sometimes what will happen is if you're not on the same broadcast domain between your deployment manager and the nodes, then you can just simply put the IP address of the node that you're wanting to discover into there and click add, and you'll see it there.
And what we will do is, and we may as well do it now, is connect to the ILO on the servers. So you can see we have got our whole bunch of servers have turned up for us now.
Yeah.
I just connect up to the ILO on one of these servers so that we can see what's actually on the screen while they're doing this install. Now, the default configuration on the ILO is a little interesting. We've reconfigured the ILOs to work on our network, but the default configuration is
correct. It's going to come with a static address, and it will always be the same static address. There's really 2 choices, DHCP or static. And in the event that customers don't have DHCP on the network, we assign a static address.
So I've
what we
assigned
did was connect
statics
into
on
that,
these. Yeah, we assigned an
change that
additional
static
IP address. Yeah, very standard, easy stuff working, particularly with ILOs. That's one of the benefits of now being part of HPE is I'm much more familiar with working with the ILOs than I am with any other remote management tools. So this is the first node in the first cluster that we're going to deploy.
So what you see here is we call it our deploy installer. It's a small system that runs on the node that will sort of be the other side of the conversation with the deployment manager. So deployment manager was that Windows application that we had. It will be sending the command and control to the deploy installer that you see here. Here in this case, we have 4 IP addresses on the network. Let's say, for example, you did not have DHCP in your environment. You would come in here, you could hit Control-N, and then this would allow you to pick the interface that you want to use, apply a static address. If you needed to add a VLAN, if you're tagging your VLANs or whatnot, you would do all of that here. And then when you're done, you'll see this waiting to be discovered under the status. And that screen that we were in that Windows App Deployment Manager installer has discovered those. Well, it's seen those. Now we're going to select one. It will be formally changed to discovered. That status will change as we move into the deployment phase.
And as we've racked and stacked these, our data center manager has given us a list of the serial numbers of the nodes. And so we're working with the serial numbers and using that to then choose what IP to assign, which is absolutely what you'd expect. So we're working with 59E as this first node. So back in the deployment manager, we have a column of serial numbers, and there's 59E. I guess we better choose our hypervisor version as well. So we get 2 different versions of vSphere.
This version of the SimpliVity software supports 2 different versions of vSphere, 6.0 and 6.5. And so you select which one of those you want to actually use for the deployment.
Great.
We support multiple versions of those, but as far as what is deployed, we don't put every single one of those on there. It's usually one build from each of the versions that we support.
Right. So Ryan McGuire asks, will this be available to download?
What is what available?
So all of the videos that we're producing today will be available on YouTube after the event. And then all of the software that we're actually using is available to customers who've bought SimpliVity hardware because it's tightly coupled.
It's in our support portal, that's correct.
And we should show you that support portal, and I've got to log into that, and we can show you the software downloads.
Yeah, and there's nothing that isn't out and available to customers.
Yes.
No, this is all GA.
As usual, there's more development and there's things coming, but we're deploying on what's shipping right now.
That's correct.
Once
Using the word shippable.
Once I've chosen the node that I want to deploy right now, I need to assign some network adapters.
So we require 3 networks when we deploy, and I guess you have management, storage, and federation. So typically, in our case, we're going to do a combination of 1 gig and 10 gig ports. We'll send management over the 1 gig and storage and federation over the 10 gig. So you're selecting those 10 gig ports there. Now we enter our passwords.
I need to type some passwords.
A host password for ESXi, and we have a command line password for the SimpliVity virtual controller.
All right. Hopefully I typed those all the same. Yes.
All right. And now we're entering the information for the management network. So this will be over your 1 gig.
Virtual controller gateway is the same. Netmask is 24-bit. There's quite a lot of input validation in these screens, which is really nice. No VLANs for that. MTU will be 9,000.
So with the MTU, we can do 1,500 or 9,000 on the management network, but we really should be at jumbo frames on the storage and federation network.
And that was one of the challenges we had as we were dry running this, was making sure that jumbo frames was enabled end to end.
Yeah.
In particular on the existing environment that didn't necessarily have a reason to have jumbo frames enabled.
That's correct. And so you can use ping with if you have a version of ping that will allow you to set that do not fragment, and then set the segment size to something larger than 1,500. That should validate for you.
Yeah.
If those are enabled.
Oh, now I've got to remember the IP addresses we assigned. But you very kindly produced a spreadsheet out of that information that we gathered in the pre-flight. And so we have all of the IP addresses for all of our nodes in this spreadsheet and all of the build information. This was the information you wanted to gather during that first pre-flight.
Correct. Our pre-flight is actually an online tool, and not everybody has access to that. And so I created a spreadsheet just to really illustrate the kind of information that we needed, but also in situations like this, where we don't have access to that online tool, we can still gather the requisite data.
And particularly for customers who are really bad at documenting their systems, having some documentation is going to be important.
Most commonly, our deployment engineers and project manager will provide a PDF version of this after we do the pre-flight, so that we have a copy of the customer has a copy of those records.
168.199. And this is node 1, so it really should be 1s in the last.
There we go.
There we go.
Now we're going to define, go ahead.
So that's the management interfaces on both the controller virtual machine and the ESXi server.
That's correct. Now we're entering the information for the storage network for both the host and the controller virtual machine.
Storage network at the top. All right.
Storage network is obviously where our data store traffic goes, not only between the SimpliVity nodes, but also if we have any compute nodes in the infrastructure as well, they'll communicate with our virtual controllers over this network.
Storage network is VLAN 31, so we are using tagging on the storage network.
Yep. And the storage network does not need to route. The only routable network we require is the management network.
Excellent. And then IP addresses. That's 31 networks, so it's 172.31.199.22 for the host.
21?
21. I typed the wrong IP address at the beginning, and then I'm trying to be consistent in the mistake that I make and do the same thing wrong all the way through. This is also a good way of doing a peer configuring, rather like peer coding, where one person is on the keyboard and the other person's making sure they don't mess things up. Thank you, Marcel.
You're welcome.
And now the
And now we're doing
network.
the federation network. This network only exists between the SimpliVity virtual controllers. And again, it doesn't have to route, and we do want jumbo frames.
This is on VLAN 32. And the IP address 172.32. And this is just on the controller, so it's a 71.
Correct.
In my my numbering schema.
All right, now we're going to enter DNS.
Lab.local, search for lab.local, ask 192.168.199.4, the domain controller.
So refresh my memory. So normally during the pre-deployment check, we're going to look for the DNS address and pointer records for ESXi, the management IP address. I just want to make sure that those exist.
Let's confirm that they exist.
Okay.
Let's drop ourselves into a command prompt, and we will ping 192.168.199.21 was the first of our ESX servers, and it's not there, which is one of our tests, but
That's
I really
good.
should have
Let's do
done
a quick NS lookup.
NS lookup 192.168.199.21.
Okay,
And
very
there
good.
I've got a
And maybe do a NS lookup on the IP and just make sure that
NS
that's
lookup. SimpliVity
Still there.
01.lab.local. Only I can't type NS lookup because, of course, there's more than one person watching my screen. That's not a bad thing. We like having an audience.
One good thing I always like to do when I set up servers was, and then we have this great room which people can't see, but we have these whiteboards all around. And it was always to have a whiteboard with all the IP addresses. So even if you do mess up, you have a guide to go through as you're putting all this stuff in.
Yeah, and we have things all over the whiteboards here. We love having walls of whiteboards in this room. We have notes all through it with different tables of states of builds and updates and changes. So we have forward and reverse lookup.
okay.
And I better do the short name as well as the full name because that's just the way VMware likes us to do name resolution.
All right, so it looks like we're good.
Good to go. DNS is configured up. And that's this bottom box here, find and register host settings. That was the really important thing about the reverse lookup, is that's how the ESX server is going to be named.
Correct.
Next up is time.
Time's very important. We're obviously doing some intense high-speed transaction operations, so timing's very important.
And you've got a distributed file system across the nodes, and that is always reliant on good time.
Yeah, we're a federated file system more than a distributed file system, so timing between the nodes is really important to understand. And so we require 3 time servers as a minimum to deploy, or maybe it's just 2. But it is important in a situation. Now, I've got customers that have us in process control and other physically isolated networks. And so it's just really the most important thing is that the time be synchronized between the SimpliVity nodes.
Be internally very consistent.
So that they're internally consistent.
And the UI in here even tells us that we need at least 3 NTP servers.
So it was 3. All right, this is sort of our sanity check here, so we can make sure that we've got the right VLANs, IP addresses, subnets, and yada yada.
71, 21, 71. Yeah, those look right.
Okay.
And then there's some.
There is a question. Homeskill at 64 once again says, "Sorry to backtrack. Can you give a brief description of Federation Network?"
Sure. The Federation network exists between the virtual controllers. It's for communication. We'll do failover and different consistency checks. We're basically creating a cluster, if you will, between the Federation across the federation network between the SimpliVity controllers within a cluster. The federation network only exists within a cluster.
And so that
stretch that to
that federation network is like a heartbeat network in some ways.
It is.
It's the maintain consistency across the nodes, and you have multiple networks for that consistency. Because presumably you also do consistency across the management network in case the federation network is down.
So we can actually communicate over the networks. The virtual controller itself is spread across 3 networks: the management network, where you see a lot of replication traffic, the storage network, which would be our NFS data store and how that's presented to ESXi on the SimpliVity nodes, as well as non-SimpliVity ESXi nodes that are mounting that data store, which we'll do later on. And then that federation network would only need to exist between the SimpliVity nodes themselves.
So the federation network is essentially just heartbeat. The storage network is storage access. And the management network is also used for any pushing of data to remote.
Correct. Now, we're very resilient, and if like you said earlier, the federation network's not available, it will communicate over other networks.
Great.
To accomplish that. And one example would be we can actually present the NFS mount point over the management IP.
Right.
We have some customers that need to do that for purpose of migration,
Mm-hmm.
But whereas we fail over the storage IP address on each virtual controller, we will not fail over the management IP.
Right.
So that's not something that you want to do on a long-term basis.
All right.
And so here, did we start the test?
I have not started the test,
okay.
so I thought I'd give us a moment to talk
Sure.
about that after I answered that wonderful question.
Why don't you click the start test, and we'll have some time to chat about it. So we've created a list of tests to test the network access, not just the IP addresses, but things like MTU, the actual ports themselves that we will be using. These are actually published to our customers during that pre-flight and pre-deployment check meetings. We'll let them know, hey, these are the ports that we need to communicate over, what the source, what the destination is, so that they can do their planning ahead of time. We're just going to validate that those ports are operational. So if there was a firewall, I have one, I mentioned the process control network, there's obviously firewalls in that. So we're validating that we have all that communication is working. So technically what's actually happening is the deployment manager, which is the user interface you see here, is communicating with the deploy installer, which was that command line user interface that's actually on the node. And that deploy installer is changing the IPs on those ports and making sure that we can communicate over those IPs. So it's a pretty comprehensive test to make sure that we've really dotted all of our I's and crossed all our T's.
We're progressing through all the tests. Everything is either green or the blue skipped. There's quite a few tests, particularly early on, that were being skipped. Any particular tribe? I mean, you can see there's some MTU tests that have been skipped. And
that may be because we haven't had a node deployed yet, so we don't have something else to...
So no other end for the
no other end
test.
for us to test that with.
But all of the tests that it has run have been passed, so,
okay, so we're ready to go. So
we're going to hit the next button.
And so I would recommend checking that box to save the settings into a configuration file. That way, you saw all the typing. You went through all the typing, right? So we can
I'd rather only type that once, I think.
So we can save ourselves some typing by putting that into a file. And all you do is select a folder, and it will put the XML file there. And now you can see that we've begun the actual deployment of this node. Now this process takes somewhere between 30, let's call it 30 and 40 minutes, typically speaking. And what's happening here is the ESXi version that we selected, which is actually already existing on the node, is going to be installed onto the boot device for the node. And then once that's up and running, we're going to configure the virtual switches on there with the NICs that we selected during the deployment. Then we're going to build the virtual controller virtual machine, fire that up, and it's going to go through its initialization phase, and then create that federation. And then once this task completes, we'll have our first node in the federation. In SimpliVity speak, we call that a 1+0. It would be I call it a single node in isolation, which is not something that you want to stay at on a long-term basis, but we're getting ready to deploy additional nodes.
It's an essential part of every start. You've got to
start
start with something.
somewhere. That's right. You got to start somewhere.
And through that process of we're going to do things that you just described, it's actually, we've already given the inputs, and the deployment manager is driving or has sent the instructions down to the deploy software on the node to do these things.
And so now you see all of that automation is taking place. It's about 27 to 33 steps, depending on whether it's the first node in a cluster. Obviously, there's more steps, or we're adding nodes to a cluster. So that's what you see happening right now.
So that's progressing along, and from our previous experience, we believe that's going to take somewhere around 30 minutes to complete. If we take a quick look at that console of this ESX server, it's not showing us a huge amount at this stage. It's just showing that it's been discovered.
That's correct. It's been discovered. We're preparing. One of the first steps that we'll do is install ESXi. So we're kind of pre-staging that right now, and then you'll see that process. It'll reboot. You'll see ESXi come up.
All right, well, that's going to take a little while, and I don't think any of us want to watch that progress bar and try and find things to say during that time. So
well, being part of sales,
yeah.
You know, what we normally do is bring donuts, or if we're in New Orleans, we'll bring beignets. But obviously, I can't share that with you guys, so here's some virtual donuts. This is where we chit-chat and talk about how well the Astros did yesterday. Congratulate them on their first World Series game win.
Game win against the LA Dodgers.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm learning some things as I travel here to the US. The other thing we'll quickly look at is a little more of the lab environment that I brought along, so we understand where we're starting from.
Okay.
And so that's this vSphere cluster, that bunch of virtual machines. One of the things that I've done is made some small changes to the networking to simplify things. And so I have fewer VM kernel ports in here. And I've also created that storage network on each of my ESX servers. So the same storage network we're going to use in the SimpliVity Federation is on my existing nodes.
So this is VLAN 31, I believe.
VLAN 31 with the 172.31.199 subnet. And I decided this was a nice, easy way to integrate with the SimpliVity platform. I don't think that this makes it easy to do the migration.
It is. It's the best way to do that. So with 2 nodes, we can direct connect those 10 gig ports on the back of the nodes. If we were to do that, we would lose access to what you're doing here. But because we're switch connected on 10 gig, and you have your existing hosts are connected also to that same 10 gig switch or into that 10 gig fabric, now we can essentially stretch that VLAN between the existing nodes and the SimpliVity nodes, and then share. What we're going to do is share that SimpliVity data store with the existing nodes, and that'll give us a facility for migration.
So we can do the storage migration separate from the compute migration, which, if you happen to have older servers and incompatible CPUs with the newer servers,
which is probably not the most common case, right? But that is the way to do it. You know, and it comes down to the Intel compatibility between your source and destination as to whether you can do a live migration or not.
Yeah.
And if you have the 10 gig, I mentioned earlier, we'll be able to do failover of that 10 gig IP between the virtual controllers. Mm-hmm. And so that would be a better way of doing it aside from the speed.
So we'll get better access to it.
Yep.
Yeah.
If you didn't have it, we could still do the migration over 1 gig. I've had customers do that. And it's not that bad. It works pretty well.
Sure. Just takes a little longer.
Takes a little bit longer.
And we have a single vSAN data store here that's got a terabyte or so of virtual machines sitting on it. So that's where the virtual machines in my existing cluster live. So I think rather than us trying to talk through some things, we'll get Jeffrey to start us up on one of the first video recorded segments.
Well, there is one question.
Oh, another question.
Good.
Excellent.
By Chris Williams. And he says, is it true that Alistair has superpowers?
I can neither confirm nor deny, Mr. Mistwire, any superpowers. They have to be observed in person. However, the moustache does capture the world's energies. All right, so we have a video of the unboxing of this rack of SimpliVity 10. That was a really cool thing to actually see, done by the team here in the Solution Center for the Americas.
Yes, and thanks to Charlie, who was part of this video, as well as right here.
You'll see him in the video in a moment.
Exactly. Here we go.
Welcome back to the vBrownBag Build Day. Today we're looking at the very first stage, what it's like to be a customer on the very first day that you deploy the HPE SimpliVity solution. We're here in a lovely quiet data center and we have a rack full of equipment sitting in a box here. I'm going to hand over to Gutierrez here, who is going to do the actual unboxing to tell us what it is we're doing and a little bit about yourself, this team, and where we are.
Sure. Thank you, Alistair. As you say, we're here to deploy and unbox first the SimpliVity that we just received from the factory. It's a few buildings away, but we still go through the whole process of the factory and packaging and all that.
So even though this equipment hasn't actually left the premises,
right,
we're still getting it packaged. This
exactly.
is actually the location where all those factory direct builds occur.
Correct. And this is exactly how the customer will receive a SimpliVity solution packaged, and they will be able to see how it's unpackaged, unboxed, and all that. We're here in a solution center for the Americas. The team works with customers to provide proof of concept and benchmarking services, and that's what we use this equipment for. So, this is Charlie, and again, my name is Gutierrez Mercado, and we will be doing all this process for you guys today.
Great, and in some of the shots you'll see rows and rows of servers here. There's about 4 rows deep. It's a nice sized data center, so there's a lot of equipment in here that you'll see in the shot. I don't think we're allowed to do a tour, so you'll have to satisfy your inner geek, or outer geek in our case, with what we can see. So let's dig in and get these boxes open and see what we've got inside.
Oh,
sure.
Sounds good.
All right.
So there's some basic instructions on the builds on the side. So let's go take a little look at what we're going to do as we actually unbox this thing.
Sure.
Right. So what are the steps?
All right, so you will get this rack that's wrapped and packaged. The first thing is cutting the wrapping tape, taking the top off, removing the white tabs from both sides of the enclosure, and then you will use some wrenches to unbolt brackets that are holding the shipping brackets, metal shipping brackets.
So the rack is attached to the actual pallet underneath?
Correct, to the actual shock pallet. So you will take 2 of those, then you will release the packaging that's inside the cardboard.
So we've got
here.
boxes for the coupling to adjacent racks and the stabilization feed if it's alone and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you will take those boxes off the way they are wrapped around the rack inside the main cardboard box, and then you will take this long box, which includes a set of ramps or 2 ramps that will be assembled in the front of the pallet, and they will be placed right in front of the rack in a couple of holes that are
pins to hold
in the pallet. So that's pretty intuitive. With this diagram, you can see in general what you need to do. Then you unbolt a couple more bolts to bring the feet up of the rack, so it will be able to roll. And then using the help of at least 3 people without being in front of the rack, so we don't want anyone to be rolled over, you will lower the rack.
Right.
So,
and for us, there's only 3 SimpliVity 380s inside this rack, so it's not terribly heavy, but you can imagine that if there were a couple of frames of Synergy in here and some 3-par, then there will be a lot of weight in there, and that risk of it running away as it comes down the ramps will be quite significant.
Yes, definitely. Usually they put the worst case scenario in case it's a fully loaded rack.
It's the same box, whether it's half empty like ours or completely loaded.
Yes.
Okay, well, I'm not allowed to do very much in this data center because I haven't been through the safety training and I'm not on the insurance. So I'll let you guys get started, and I will ask you some questions as we go along. All right, let's get it open.
All right.
Sounds good.
So we'll use a standard set of tools. The first one is just to cut some of this. You can use a cutter or
Either like
pliers, whatever you have on hand. So let's see.
You want somebody tall to help with that one?
Yeah,
Here.
we can use your help here.
Yeah. Go.
Oh, careful.
All right.
There we go.
Yeah.
So can you take the?
All right. Yeah, take this.
Can you take the white tabs on the
Okay.
other side?
All right, yeah. So now we're taking these white tabs off. This is kind of holding the box together. Yep. So these are, they just like open and close like so.
And you'll remember them from Proliant packaging for the last 20 years.
Yeah.
All right.
And then, yeah, let me give you a hand.
So some nice big chunks of cardboard for my children to play with.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I figure they might be a little oversized for checked baggage. So lots of plastic wrap and foam to make sure there's no damage inside, even if this gets shipped halfway around the world.
I think it's tied down.
Yeah, it's tight over here. Yeah, go for it.
It is like
basically.
Christmas.
Like unwrapping a huge Christmas present.
It's fun. All right. So then we take the boxes on the side of the rack. This is particular boxes are the RAM.
There you go.
Cute.
And now we're lifting the curtain now.
Yeah. Taking the plastic bag off of here.
So this is a huge plastic bag for
So this is definitely not for my children to play with.
storing Christmas presents or something.
Or making hot air balloons.
Exactly. So this is the rack. We can the accessory to the shock pallet. So let's try this. So this is a 11/16 wrench.
So there are also the same thing on the other side. You may not be able to see it in the camera. So I'll go there and I'll kind of unbolt it on the other side as well.
So both front and back securely locked to the pallet.
Right. So these are the shipping brackets, basically.
So these brackets are only for during shipping time. They're
Correct.
disposed of once we're
Correct.
off.
They are disposed along with the
But the accessory pack's got the
And the
actual
shock pallet.
seismic floor
correct.
foot.
Yes, those are options that you can order
Okay, that's-
along with the rack.
Depending
if it
upon
will
whether
be
you-
standing alone, then you need the stabilizing bracket,
Yeah.
stabilizing feet. If they will be coupled together with other racks, then you don't need that.
This side.
So,
Yeah.
all right. So let me bring another wrench for this smaller
Try to see if this one works.
the smaller one.
No,
I need that
Oh,
one.
you need this one? Okay,
Okay.
let me. Okay, so
Charlie has the wrench, so I will fully take this off. Can I have
go for it.
the,
Take
yeah.
this one.
And these are for the bottom views.
You want me to go in closer with the camera? You want me to go in closer with the camera?
All right, we have the brackets off.
Too late.
Do you want me to show you? Okay. All right, let's open the, so here's a more detailed diagram of,
Let's get it the right way so we can see. It's kind of heavy.
yes, these are wooden ramps. So basically what it shows after you raise the feet, so it won't get caught in the ramp or
ledge.
the wooden sides on the ledge. So you have to assemble the ramp so the wooden ledge will be in the center
inside.
or facing in the inside of the rolling rack. So with your feet you stomp them down into the holes that are drilled into the shock pallet. You have to put this with Velcro that they have.
Mhm.
You have to place them
Some
so
additional supports under.
they will support the ramp throughout that. Never put you in front of the rack to try to stop it. And always be careful, like
So guiding
multiple
from the
people,
sides.
depending on the weight of the rack.
Yes.
So we recommend 3 people so they can drive the rack.
Keep it aligned, and
Correct. And someone else pushing, because this might be
you've got to get
heavy,
it started.
and then and they have to
Get over
pass
that
through
edge.
a little ledges and stuff
Yeah.
like that.
And it's
So-
rolling on feet that are designed to be static. It's not. There's no wheels underneath the rack.
Now there's
So
wheels
there is
on
wheels?
the rack,
Okay.
but you have feet to once you place it in
Yeah.
In the definitive
Okay.
spot.
Oh, right. So we're lifting the feet up.
Yeah, we're
so
lifting the
they
feet.
clear.
These
Right.
are the same you will lower once it's in place.
Okay, so there are.
and you want,
It
yeah.
is going to be rolling on wheels, which is a little
Exactly.
easier.
So I guess we can open it. Any side will do. So what we usually do is just put it there and try to slide them out. Are they stuck?
This one as well. And then we can just slide them out. Okay, that's fine.
This goes in the inside.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So. So these feet are already up. We just want to make sure they are up so we don't hit. You can use your feet or stomp it with hammer. So they have a little letter there that should match the letter here.
If you can't see from the sizing that they're in the right place, you at least have some labeling to tell you.
Right. I think this needs to go.
Velcro to stay in place.
Oh, this is sometimes they don't line up perfectly,
yeah,
so
sometimes
you
it doesn't line up quite.
so you
Exactly,
have
but
to
as
make
long-
it
As long as it supports the ramp, it's good.
So yeah, this is the result of being too far back. You need to move
Yeah.
the A
a further.
because it's not completely rigid along there because it's got
Yeah.
that hinge in the middle, and you need that hinge to be
Right.
smooth.
So you just need to make sure there's no.
Yeah, it's that. Yeah.
Okay. So something maybe B is not sitting proper. Yeah.
So it's just a bunch of little adjustments to stand on it to make sure it's good.
Just to make sure it's safe. Yeah. All right.
Okay.
So then you visually align the ramps. The pallet is aligned with the tiles, so we can align the ramps with the tile too.
So that the rack will come down from the shock pallet smoothly.
Right.
And we'll stay on the ramps the whole
Exactly.
end because
Yeah. Richard, can you help us push the
So
rack?
again, the 3-man arrangement,
Yeah.
one at the front getting things rolling, and the two on the sides who are primarily to keep it
Ready?
straight
1, 2, 3.
Three.
and to make sure it doesn't run away. And,
All right.
and there it is. We have
There he goes.
So
a
there
rack
it is.
off the pallet.
And now we just pick this
This
up.
can all now be cleaned up, and
Yep.
we can get all this packaging out of the data center before the data center manager, Gutierrez, starts complaining that we've got all this packaging in here.
Exactly.
Oh, it's waiting for Charlie.
Okay. All right.
So that's the whole process, how it's done. We have the rack here and ready to roll it into the final position where we will be helping Alistair to implement it during the next
Through the
session.
build day. Yeah, so it's going to be rolled into place in the rack. It's in this data center, you've got a gap in the middle of a rack that you can put it into, couple it up to either side, feed in the power, and then hook into the existing network, and all will be good.
Correct.
Yep.
So
Well, I think the other thing we should do is have a look at what's actually in the rack, because it's going to be far easier to see here and far better lit.
Sure.
So let's see what actually turns up in these racks as they come from factory direct.
Sure. Do we need to like
So
move
let's,
the rack to the
let's,
camera?
let's bring it back this way so we can see it.
All right.
So this is the rack. This is a 3-node SimpliVity system. So it comes with the 3 SimpliVity nodes and the blanking panels. Obviously, you saw the back; it was empty. We have a 0U PDU for powering the extension cords here on the side of the rack, where all the servers and anything we put on top,
So
like
it's
switches.
already
or
got
so-
enough PDU capacity in there for a fairly normally populated rack. I mean, we're
Yeah.
not using a lot of the power that's
Correct.
being fed.
In fact, only one circuit is used by those 3 servers. So the first circuit is the only one used. You have multiple extension.
So that's all
cables.
already populated into the side PDUs.
Correct.
Right.
Let me show you.
for a magician's assistant
To pop out of here?
Yes. So each pair comes off of the two 0U PDUs. You have two for redundancy, power redundancy. And this is the first circuit, second, third, fourth, and it corresponds to the breakers that you have on the PDU. And there's open. You only have 4 per PDU and 3 more open there. So.
And everything nice and cleanly cabled down. We've got the leads going through cable management arms into the servers.
Correct. This is factory integrated, so you will see the arms running the power cables. If you order your solution with network integrated from factory, the network cables will be also run through the arms. And yeah, it comes neatly packaged. The power connectors, these are L1530s.
Yeah, but that's again a geographic specific option.
Correct.
Like all of the things in here.
Yeah, these same PDUs can come with a variety of connectors. Yeah, so exactly.
Nice. And do we have some environmentals in here as well?
This is the power control unit. You can connect this to power management units. They will also have, these are the smart connectors, all the cables that end up, or the...
Hey, sorry about that little interruption. So we did almost get to the very end. Nope.
Hold on.
Sorry about that interruption to those watching live on the stream. We did almost get to the very end of that video of the unboxing, which a few people have not seen before, and those who have seen it before have seen it many times before. And particularly Gutierrez says he is unboxing those whole racks pretty much every week. So we got a couple of questions from Unix super users during the stream, and the first one was, do we get a rack every time we buy some SimpliVity?
And the answer is only if you want to.
So this is an option around this factory
That's
direct.
correct. In fact, in my experience, and I've been with SimpliVity 2 years, most of my customers just get the 2U servers. They already have the racks, so they don't need it. So,
but it is an option.
It's definitely an option, and I noticed how nice and compact and well things were integrated into the rack, and I would definitely save time. But.
And that's one of the things that's done here at the Houston location, and the next building over is where they do those factory integrated installs. And Phil Sellers commenting on how nice it all looks and how it soothes his OCD. That's one of the nicest things about going down and seeing that facility where the factory integrated stuff is done, and seeing all the work that's done on making it
As someone
clean.
who's done that kind of work before, not just in a factory type setting, but really in live environments in the field. You know, I had one particular, I was going to do a storage array implementation, and there was just a mess of cables, and the customer said, "Oh, just move those out of the way." I'm like, "I'm not touching that."
You move those out of the way, something's going to come out.
Come back when you move them.
Yeah. The second question from Unix super user was about the licensing that's included, which we haven't discussed at all.
Yeah, so there's the SimpliVity side, which is licensed per node. And then we also have a RapidDR, which is licensed separately. We'll talk about that later. But on the VMware side, customers can reuse their existing licenses. They can purchase new licenses. We work with every edition of the VMware licensing. But that said, we can't really break customers out of any of the limitations of the licensing. So for example, the Essentials and Essentials Plus kits are limited in scope to 3 nodes and 1 vCenter that can't do link mode. Well, we can operate and run on, we're an NFS mount point. NFS is not a licensed feature in vSphere. It works on every edition. And so all of the SimpliVity data efficiency and features of our data virtualization platform will operate over that NFS mount point, but we can't help customers that have the Essentials kits to break out of any of those restrictions that VMware puts on the license.
So the customer is responsible ultimately for license compliance,
That's
but
correct.
they can choose to buy the licensing as part of a bundle with the hardware.
That's correct.
And one of the things that Unix super user asked about was vSAN licensing, and you don't use vSAN,
No,
you have your own.
Yeah, we're not a vSAN solution. This is a SimpliVity solution that we put together We'll go into more details around the data virtualization platform
Yeah.
and the components that are within that. And it'll be pretty obvious that it's not a vSAN solution at that point. That's a good question.
And I think some of that comes up from my lab, which does have vSAN in it. So the customer environment that I bought, that I now want to deploy SimpliVity into, has a legacy vSAN. Ooh, legacy vSAN, that's an interesting phrasing. It has an existing vSAN implementation
I'm okay with that
we want to migrate off in this process.
Sure.
And the final question we got that I saw during the live stream of that unbox was from Homeschool at 64, asking if that was UPSs stuck in the sides of the rack. Now, you weren't there when we deployed it, when we unboxed it, but they were the 0U PDUs, so there was no power protection in the racks that we brought, because of course it's going into a data center here that has power resiliency built into the data center. But those were the power distribution, so we just had those two big screw lock cables that go into the floor, and then power distribution up the sides, and yeah, no UPS actually in that rack.
Okay, great questions. Thanks, guys.
So keep the questions coming, and the guys in the room with us here will be watching out for those, and we'll endeavor to answer them as quickly as we can.
All right, so it looks like our deployment succeeded.
Yeah, Jeffrey, can we get the lab environment back up again, and we can see our deployment has succeeded? That's good.
That's
good.
That's
Success.
Success is good. We like success.
So popping back into our vSphere environment, I'll just collapse up my existing two clusters so that they're out of sight a little. And then expand my production data center that is my first SimpliVity.
Okay,
excellent.
There you go. And that's just alerting. We one of the technical aspects that we do is we do VMware pass-through or VM Direct Path I/O. And so that's why you'll see the badge here. There was a change with the 6.5 release that
the way it alerts on memory utilization.
Memory consumption. It can't actually accurately check with VMs in that case. So that's why that badge is there. So you can go ahead and say reset to green or acknowledge. Okay, and so now at this point, our deployment, because our deployment engineers, keep in mind, it's our deployment engineers who are actually doing this for us, and they're typically remote. The next step they would go through is some basic post-deployment checks. So if you can go ahead and bring up PuTTY, this is what they would do. We don't require PuTTY for ongoing operations. The command line is really used by our deployment engineers to validate that things went well. So what we're going to do is log into that virtual controller on the node we just deployed. We're going to log in with the vCenter credentials so you can use your service account.
I did it again, 72.
You did the 72. That one's not
That's
there
better.
yet. There we go. So go ahead and log in with the vCenter credentials. We're going to establish a connection to vCenter.
And that was one thing that surprised me, is I'm not logging in with the local credentials on the controller. I'm logging in with my domain credentials.
That's correct.
That are being authenticated out of vSphere.
Out of SSO.
Can you stop and restart your presenter?
And it seems that the updates on my desktop are not actually coming through in the video, so let me just quit out of the capture piece on that and start it again. And hopefully, I got a new IP address when I shouldn't have, Jeffrey. That's going to cause you a problem. Let me hard set my IP address at this end. So folks, somewhere along the way, configuration changes have been painful, and now we'll just hard set IP addresses,
how you
which
know it's
of
live,
course
right?
It
Do you have an
is.
HDMI on that adapter?
Yes. Okay, something else is using my .4 address.
Is it .4 or .6?
Oh, it is .6. You're right. It is .6. We'll apply that. Close that. Run desktop presenter again. Okay, you want to check that I'm seeing the update? So I'm definitely on .6. And still not seeing the updates. seems to be a moment of issues with our software that we use for sending the live stream across. Trying to get the screen capture off my laptop to behave is causing us a little bit of pain at this moment.
Reboot again.
All right, so
Fix this. I don't think they can hear.
oh, you think there's no audio?
No, I think the broadcast is frozen.
Okay, you want to check the audio, G? We got any audio on the stream? No. Okay, you got audio? You can hear us? Just confirming out whether you guys on the stream can hear us or whether it's gone silent on you again. And we're just working to recapture my screen. As Ken said, my vCenter screen didn't show up because Wirecast wasn't redoing the capture. So with a little bit of luck, we'll be able to get that recaptured back in. Jeffrey is working furiously in the background to get things reconfigured to capture my screen using a different method using the HDMI out.
So when we come back,
all right, still more technical issues. Hopefully this time things will be locked in a little further. Now, if you recall before everything froze, we had managed to deploy one node in our SimpliVity cluster and we're checking out the configuration. Of course, you hadn't seen the vCenter screen, so if we switch across to my desktop, you'll miraculously see vCenter there now. As you can see, we have the production cluster down the bottom, and we've got our one SimpliVity node. It's up, it's looking fairly healthy. And if you're listening along, Marcel was directing me to SSH connect to that controller machine.
Correct. Now, this is something that our deployment engineers would do to perform these post-deployment checks. It's not something, the command line is not something that's necessary on an operational basis. That said, you can do a lot of things through the command line. We also publish a RESTful API to do a lot of these things. So the first thing we want to do is check on the health of the federation. So we have a command called svt federation show.
I like the command completion.
I like that too. And so we can say return, and now you see that it's connected and alive. The status is connected to the Arbiter. You can see the IP addresses. This is the virtual controller for the first node that we just deployed. You can see the IP addresses across the management, storage, and federation networks, and what release of the software that we're using. So the next thing we want to do that's on the post-deployment checks, excuse me, is to set the time zone for the data center. So I think that's the SVT time zone set.
Yeah, remember that I could never correctly type anything. So I was going to just list out the time zones, but I was going to grab Los Angeles out of that as well with a oh, that's right, it's all case sensitive. I dropped the A off the end for a reason. There we go, that's right. What I wanted. SVT time
singular dash
zone set. And the
if
help
you hit
on
return,
that
it'll
says,
tell you what commands or what parameters are required. I think in this case, the data center and the time zone will be the two required parameters. So here you can just copy that text from the time zones list.
This is why I like using PuTTY and why I got that on my screen first.
And just to confirm, this is normally something done by our deployment engineers.
You know, so the data center wasn't mandatory. So I've set the time zone without escape, and it's happy. Now let's actually set it for the data center because there is a, you know, every possibility that we would have more than one data center, and this data center is called local. And that task is complete.
Okay.
Cool.
And now we can hop over to vCenter. We can do this from the command line. You can do it from the GUI. But just to show that we're right-click integrated into vCenter, right-click on the SimpliVity cluster, and let's create a data store.
So that's down here in the
all
SimpliVity
SimpliVity actions, very easy to find. So when you create a data store, we only need to know four things, really. One of them is where do you want to create it? That's the cluster. You need to give it a name.
So I've only got one.
Today, right
cluster.
now, so far, there's only your production cluster. So provide it a name, give it a capacity, and then a backup policy. We don't actually back up the data store with the policy. We can go ahead and...
I'm going to go 1 terabyte on my data store side just because it's easy. So there are
what's
no...
a terabyte these days?
That's right.
Actually, it's a virtual capacity, so you literally could put any number there that you wanted.
Oh, in that case, I'll create a 15 terabyte data store.
Sounds good to me.
But because there's no default
Because
backup policies in there.
Right. We haven't defined any backup policies. Now, a policy on SimpliVity consists of rules, and a rule is, you can think of a rule as a copy of your data. So you've given the policy a name, you can click the Create Rule button. Everything that we do is VM-centric. So we're going to back up the virtual machine. Here we just need to specify the frequency, the retention period, and the destination for the copy. And you can use keyword local, which will mean whichever VMware cluster that virtual machine is running in at the time of the backup. So let's do that. Say OK. And then now you can say OK. Again, we're not going to back up the data store with that. We're going to apply this policy to any VMs that you create or migrate onto that data
And that's
store.
what it's saying in here. This is the default backup policy.
Default backup
if I create a virtual machine, dump it on the data store, it will get this.
It will automatically
backup
inherit
policy.
that backup policy.
So no matter what idiot creates the data store, we get it there.
And so now when you click OK, that data store will automatically be mounted. There won't be any more configuration for you to do.
So if I look at my ESX server and
So
look at
you
the data
could-
stores list, there it is. My 15 terabyte data store is,
There it is.
available. Excellent.
Very good. And now what we can do is share that data store back to your existing cluster or host in your existing cluster. So just for grins, Alt tab over to the command line. I think that's SVT data store share.
Data store share.
Click it share, and then
And so it wants to
it's
know,
probably the cluster and the host.
let's data stores.
The data store and the host, sorry.
I just want a list of my data stores. Oh, there isn't a data store list. All right. So I want to share data store, and I called it SimpliVity -101-1-1, and the
And now your host would be a host, one of your
host
existing hosts that you want to choose to.
lab.local. All right, now you can see what we're doing. So now we're doing the SVT data store share, data store name to host
Correct.
one.
He just he's letting us know that there's some setup that you need to do with that existing host, which we've already done. It's documented in our administration guide. I think it's under Chapter 6, Data
Right.
Store Management. So essentially, we've already done that.
And
What
the
we're
summary
doing
was some advanced settings to tune the NFS stack.
Yep.
And a DNS record.
And a DNS record
that points
or
to
a host record. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's going
a host
to point to
record.
the storage IP address on our virtual
Yep.
controller.
Great.
That's
We'll
correct.
say yes, go ahead and do that. And it says that you have chosen the wrong name for your data store, which is why I should rearrange things so I can see my data store. I didn't put a capital V in this data store. There it is. I've been using the probably trademarked capital V all the way, and this time I didn't. Now it's happier.
And there we go. So there's, when it comes to migration of existing workloads, there's multiple approaches that you can take. It's typically easier to have an existing host mount a new NFS mount point. than it is to have a new host get integrated into your existing SAN, iSCSI SAN.
NFS is extremely easy to access.
It's very easy to access.
And we're typically only doing this for the duration of a migration in this
correct.
kind of use.
That's correct.
I'm going to add my second host as well.
We can also do this on an ongoing basis. We do it a lot for things like VDI. We'll talk more about that when we get into the use
And
cases.
here we've created a new cluster for our SimpliVity nodes. And is that a fairly common configuration, or do you often integrate into
I would
existing
say
clusters?
it's probably most common. We just create a new cluster. But it can go either way.
Okay.
Again, you have those Intel compatibility considerations to think about.
Yeah, so within a single, usually HA and DRS cluster, you want the same CPU types across.
Yep. Yep.
And in our case, we've created a separate cluster because my existing environment uses vSAN, and vSAN doesn't necessarily interact very well in the same cluster with SimpliVity, it seems. That was a little of our experience.
So you're sharing with a different host?
I am. I'm sharing with host 2, which should behave really nicely. But it seems to be taking an awful long time at this point. So let me just confirm that host 2 has an IP address on the correct subnet, because that's the kind of thing that would cause us a problem here. And it still has, it's got a VM kernel port here called SVT store port group, and that's sitting on the 10 gig switch.
Okay.
SVT store port group, that's all there. Make sure that I've got jumbo frames enabled on the switch, which I do. And I better check that that VM kernel port also has jumbo frames enabled. Come on, next settings.
All right, let's take a quick look at the Etsy host.
There's a
on there
point.
and just
Okay,
see.
let me, I don't need him anymore. But what I will need is another.
So I think I know what's going on. Is he's probably pointing to a virtual controller address that
That's not
doesn't
currently running.
exist. Yep.
This is.
So let's go. Maybe we can go ahead and start the deployment of the next node.
Yes,
That's what we're gonna
That's
see.
probably the best thing, because this has failed because we don't want both of our ESX servers pointing to the same node, because that would be
Typically, what we'll
satisfying.
do is point one to one and one to the other. That IP will fail over between the virtual controllers if needed.
So let's get that second node up
Yep.
anyway. New deployment. Have to log back into vCenter because it's been a little while.
You can go ahead and clear the completed, or say okay, that's fine.
And now we want to go again into the production cluster. And last time we saved out the configuration file, so we're going to reuse that.
I like to do that. It saves a lot of typing, so we'll just have to make sure we change all of the IP addresses accordingly, or we will, what I call, hose ourselves.
It's much easier to just change one IP address than to retype all of the IPs. We did, during one of the dry runs, I copied that file out multiple times and did search and replace through the files to get the IP addresses correct. You just have to be a little careful of your search and replace that it actually has the right scope on it. So my search was too narrow. It just looked for 7.2, and some of my IP address ranges are 172 dot something, and then the end is 72. That caused me a little bit of pain. So be good at IT, as I was not.
And that's, of course, why we give you that screen of all the IP addresses and everything, sort of that last step of validation. And I know it's real easy to click next, but I like, when I'm doing the deployments, I like to make sure and check every one of those just as a...
And that's another lesson that you learn being out in the field and doing the real work.
These deployments don't take that long, really, when you think about what we're actually doing.
Yeah.
But it's still 30 minutes, and if I can avoid
having to do it again,
then I like that.
Notice that this time we didn't get asked what version of vSphere we wanted to deploy. The wizard, when we ran it the first time, when there was no SimpliVity cluster, said what version of vSphere.
Correct.
Now it's saying, well, you've told me once, I can actually discover it out of the inventory. I'm not going to ask you again.
That's right. No need to ask.
We should be consistent. All right.
That's probably
Choose my host. And then, it's funny it doesn't tell me which host I'm confirming to select, but at least I can see it in the background. Once again, select my network adapters the same as we did before.
Correct. So one on the 1 gig, one on the 10 gig.
Storage and fed on the 10 gig.
Correct. And one of the things that is actually in our post-deployment checks that we neglected to do was to go add that second NIC into those virtual switches on that deployed node, so we can do that after we get this started here.
So you would normally have that
That's
checklist
part
in front of you.
Yeah, we would have that checklist in front of us, and,
Yep.
or our deployment engineer would have that.
There we go.
All right.
And now we want to come into the IP addresses and change all the
These are gonna be
21s
2s.
and 71s to 2s, which is what I tried to type the first time.
So I like the way that you've organized your IP addressing and keeping the last octet the same for the ESXi host as well as the virtual controller. Really helps when you have the multiple networks to hone in on which node you're working with.
Because I have full control of my IP schema, and this is, although we treat it as a customer, it is in reality a lab, and so I blow it away reasonably regularly, and there's not huge amounts of leftover hangover IP addresses the way there are in a production environment in some cases. All right.
Very good.
NTP servers summary, it's 22s and 72s, 22s and 72s, because of course that's all we changed in this config file. And again, test the
Now
host
in this
settings.
particular case, because there's a node that's already deployed, we're actually going to add some additional checks.
All of the checks that are side to side across those non-routable networks will occur again.
Yeah. So we're building a list. Go ahead and say start.
Test. And so some of these consistency checks weren't run the first time. They were skipped, and now they have succeeded. Consistency of speeds and MTUs have all gone through. And then we'll also see more of the connectivity tests across those private networks actually being run this time. SSH connection.
And so, the first node that you deploy, you'll kind of, depending on the existing environment and the condition of that environment, you may run into some things that need remediation that we didn't catch during
the pre-flights.
Pre-flight. There's going to be some additional checks here that could cause, depending on the situation, some additional failure scenarios. But generally speaking, once you get that first node deployed, things are pretty smooth.
So this is where we would find things like the VLAN issue that we struck. Once we've got consistent presentation of VLAN across all the nodes.
One VLAN was missing from one of our ports.
One of our switches, and so then the first one was fine. The second one was not so happy.
Yeah. And that was events because we were doing additional checks.
And there we go.
I'd like to see all that.
So that's all passed. So we will just go through and start this deployment. Don't need to save the settings again. We're just going to continue to reuse the previous settings.
Okay.
And as before, this is going to take some time to cycle through and do the install. And so what have we got on the list? We should actually have a look at what this hyperconverged thing is.
Idea.
I think get some of the fundamentals of hyperconverged in. Let me just clean up some of my screens out of here that I clicked in the wrong places. And we have this.
All right. So when you think about infrastructure, there's a lot of components that go into the modern infrastructure system, a business system. And so here, typically hyperconvergence, really honestly speaking, there's so many different uses of the term hyperconvergence.
It's very much a marketing word rather than
a very
a technical
marketish word, right?
description.
It's kind of like, it reminds me of the term cloud from a few years ago. In the term cloud, everybody had a different definition of cloud.
Yeah, slides, please, Jeffrey. Yes, and we'd have that discussion of what does cloud mean to you.
What is exactly? And
but even stepping back a little bit, I like to frame this around it's virtualization's fault that we have this problem. But we used to have storage inside individual servers and networks linking those, and they were each independent units, and it was quite simple. And then when we deployed virtualization, we needed to deploy shared storage and a storage network to access it. And we got huge business benefits out of it. But over time, we built up more and more virtualization, and it became more and more of a problem to deal with those additional layers that virtualization caused us to add.
Yeah.
And that's the problem space to me, is that we have this multiple pieces of technology, lots of servers, multiple networks for access and vMotion and for a storage network, and then these storage devices as well.
That's correct. That's correct. And so I think really the benefit of hyperconvergence is taking these three layers of the infrastructure, the servers, the SAN, and the storage, and consolidating those down. And it's a process that I like to call functional elimination.
But there was a process before that of the sort of integration of these things.
Well, that's a good point.
'Cause
That's a very good point. You're talking about integration,
well, yeah,
functional integration.
The evolution of hyperconvergence first started with convergence, where essentially you took that collection of disparate pieces, you wrapped it up in a single stock code and a single delivery item.
That's correct.
But you still had all of those components.
And all those components are still there.
Yeah.
They all have their own product life cycle. They all have their own patch schedule, their own quirkiness, sometimes I'll say versions of Java that they come with that you have to maintain.
Often the challenge is that it was easy to buy. There's one stock code for it. It was easy to deploy because you pulled it off the back of a truck and put it on the data center.
Plug it in.
But it was a nightmare to manage and operate because the vendor would have to certify all of the combination of parts that you could have together and all of the updates and the changes. And then the update was actually to separately apply each of those changes and updates to get from one supported level to another supported level, and that transition phase was a nightmare.
That's
so
correct.
Easy to buy.
The way I describe it is that the complexity of that legacy stack you see on the left-hand side just became a latent complexity in that integrated system.
Yeah.
And so, there's a number of ways that we can simplify environments. One of them is through functional elimination. And an example would be like a discrete Garmin GPS unit or a TomTom, right?
Mm.
I remember when I first got my Garmin GPS unit, it was really, because I took it everywhere, and we'd take it on vacation and we'd look up a Walmart because we needed to shop, and we'd pull into the parking lot that was empty and there's plywood on the windows, right?
It was a Walmart when this.
It was a
GPS
Walmart
shipped.
it was a Walmart when they last updated the maps. And so you think about how that was a separate device with its own battery, its own power cord, its own product life cycle, its own patch schedule, if you will, updating the maps. Who is responsible for patching? You were responsible for patching, right? And now compare that to your smartphone, right? If you know how to use your smartphone, you know how to use the mapping application that's on your smartphone. You don't have to manage any of the complexity around the maps. That has been functionally integrated. All of that complexity now just becomes an integrated feature of your smartphone, and you don't have to worry yourself with that. To a large degree, the storage area network and the SAN have become functionally integrated as part of hyperconvergence.
And that's that transition from integrated
systems into that hyperconvergence. Exactly correct. So now what you'll notice is that discrete storage array goes away, and now we're beginning to use the local disk in each node, and we have a shared data fabric between the nodes, and they're sharing data up to the hypervisor.
And we eliminated the separate silos of storage and storage networking.
And compute, right?
Right.
And so that's really, I think, when you say hyperconverged today, this is really what 99% of people think of hyperconverged is servers and SAN and storage area. I'm sorry, and storage.
All inside the one box.
All inside one box. That's correct.
Great. Well, that's a fairly simple progression through, and we're going to return to that progression in a little while. But what have we got? We wanted to have a look at the HPE portfolio that surrounds the SimpliVity products. And we had an interview with somebody a little more senior than we have in the room with us today, talking about that.
I appreciate that.
So, Jeffrey, would you like to play the HPE product portfolio video for us? Welcome back to another vBrownBag Build Day video. I'm Alistair Cook, and we're here at the Houston campus for HPE, talking about the SimpliVity platform that HPE have acquired recently. Before we look specifically at SimpliVity, we want to look a little more widely at the HPE portfolio, and that's why I am joined by John Kramoa. John, could you introduce yourself to the audience and let them know where it is in HPE that you are?
Sounds great. I'm within our software-defined and cloud group within the overall HPE organization. It's a peer organization to our hybrid IT group that focuses on infrastructure. And SDCG is really here to provide value-added software-defined offerings above and beyond the underlying infrastructure pieces.
Right, so getting beyond just selling some of these wonderful Gen 10 servers and getting towards more of a solution.
Yeah, we've absolutely got leading infrastructure products. How can we put leading software-defined offerings on top of that as well?
So SimpliVity is one of the products. What sort of characterization would you say about where SimpliVity gets used in your clients' data centers?
Well, overall, SimpliVity fits within our broader portfolio of software-defined products. That includes 3 or 4 different offerings. You know, there's a basic infrastructure manager called OneView that's been around quite a while. On top of that, we have this HyperConverged Centric offering that we talk about at SimpliVity. We can get into some more details about that later. But how we do infrastructure management, hyper-converged offerings, composable as another capability that we'll add. That's part of our overall synergy type of offerings. And then the most recent addition is our hybrid IT offering with a Project New Stack offering that we've talked about. Each of these fit together from a software-defined point of view. We'll increase the amount of APIs that work between those so you can mix and match those to whatever solution that you need on top of that basic infrastructure we talked about.
So it's a fairly comprehensive collection of parts, and that's one of the key things for working with HPE is having all of the parts coming from one place and working in a cohesive way.
Yeah, and not only today how they fit together, but how do we grow each of them together? We sometimes talk about these almost in a nested dolls type of fashion, but it's almost like this 3-dimensional cube that as each one of these enhances or grows, the benefits of each of them accrue to the others as well. So when I improve my overall ability to do hyperconvergence, it can improve things in the synergy world as well. If I improve my hybrid IT reach, that can also benefit to the others. So it's a great case where the breadth of our portfolio gives us overall better capability.
So how would customers go about choosing between deploying a Synergy solution or a SimpliVity solution, or maybe going to a collection of DL380s with some 3PI storage behind them, one of your earlier acquisitions?
So, you know, the custom design, bottoms-up kind of approach of using all the infrastructure pieces and independently all the software pieces is always an option that a lot of customers want. We're moving to a world, though, where you can have greater integration of the software pieces with those platforms with, you could almost call them appliance-like offerings, but it's not exactly an appliance. Hyperconverged starts with the packaging of these server storage and virtualization pieces, but there's a lot of very special technology underneath the SimpliVity hyperconverged offering that makes it a great solution for anything virtualization. And we can talk later about sort of the futures of that and how virtualization grows to be something much more than that.
And of course, we've got lots of videos in this series that dig deeply into the SimpliVity magic special sauce in the software and some elements in the hardware as well that you can see in the playlist. Okay, I think that was a nice view of what was going on in the portfolio.
Yeah, that's a great overview. Puts things into the world.
We will then talk, John and I will talk also about the portfolio of the SimpliVity products and the various options that are available in there and maybe some futures.
Excellent. So, you know, from a SimpliVity point of view,
we'll do that in another video.
All right.
So stay tuned for those videos. Come back and have a look at the playlist, and of course, always watch the Build Day live when you have the opportunity. So that's the wider portfolio of products, and as you can see, the install is progressing along. But we thought we should, now that we've set up HyperConverged, we should also show what's unique about SimpliVity solution.
Absolutely.
Because it's not just a generic HyperConverged. So let me.
I agree. I've been doing pre-sales for about 20 years, and this is definitely one of the most differentiated products that I've ever represented. So this is where we left off. You have the HyperConverged, which being the consolidation of the servers, the SAN, and the storage array. The challenge is that business systems never consist of just servers and storage. We have other things that we need to do, like data protection, replication, backup, restore,
backups are kind of important.
yeah, disaster recovery, things of that nature. And so as you see, you have to add these components into the infrastructure to have a business system. And then each one of these is its own product lifecycle, patch schedule, et cetera, et cetera.
So I'm back to managing
So I'm
multiple
back
disparate
to
pieces.
managing all of these different systems. And from the perspective of IT operations, it's not just the product the IT operations has to deal with. They also get to deal with the timelines and availability of the business.
Yeah.
You know, and so you may have
and also the
multiple business
interfaces
units.
between each piece, having to develop the interactions between the different layers, needing your backup software to understand your storage in order to get the best backups out.
That's correct. And so, you know, it's I call it the pouring the new wine into the old wineskin problem. You know, sometimes you have older infrastructure in one aspect of that stack, and that causes a lot of pain and grief in the IT operations.
Yeah, we don't rip and replace everything. We normally cyclically replace, and there's always something that's out of date and old-fashioned.
And so when people ask me, well, what makes SimpliVity special? And sometimes what I'll say, or what Steve is the sales rep I work with, and what he'll say is, we don't like the term hyperconvergence because it's narrow as it applies to SimpliVity. So actually what SimpliVity does is we functionally eliminate a lot of components in that legacy stack. We do it through a process that we call data virtualization, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But essentially, we're functionally eliminating the backup, the restore, the replication, the DR automation. All of those become essentially integrated features of the SimpliVity platform, which greatly simplifies the ongoing operations of that environment. You can think about the benefits that you get out of not having to carry around 3 or 4 separate devices in your bag everywhere. Well, okay, you get to do it because you're doing these.
I carry multiple, but
until they
even
hyperconverge that.
I don't have to carry a GPS device, a camera, an iPod,
camera,
and yeah,
exactly. All of those different devices. Now you just have one. So
just one thing that eliminates all of those functions when the battery is flat.
That's right. And so you can think about the simplification that provides in the environment. And as a result, SimpliVity customers are seeing great total cost of ownership. I know we've done a number of return on investment analysis for our prospects, and typically we're seeing ROIs in the 190 to 250 range, simply because we're not only functionally eliminating specific products in the architecture, but we're also simplifying IT operations as far as where people spend their time. And you know, we have a saying of, we spend all our time keeping the lights on. We can't ever get to any of those innovative projects and things that we want to get to that really move things forward for the business. And that's really, I think, the biggest impact that SimpliVity has. And when Steve and I visited, we inherited a territory that already had customers. And so we would go and we would interview these customers. Hey, how do you like SimpliVity? How long have you been using it? You know, the most common consistent feedback that we got from our existing customers was how easy it was to manage. They didn't have to think about it, that where they used to spend lots of their time in VMware vCenter or in the infrastructure managing that, they could now focus on other things.
And that's one of the things that I see through SimpliVity and as being the real value. The actual convergence of the hardware together, putting the storage inside the servers, I don't see as being the real value of going for a hyper-converged and SimpliVity solution. I see the operational simplicity, because you don't have to spend so much time every month caring for watering and feeding their infrastructure, is where the real payoff for customers is.
That's correct. And it really falls into the 3 key aspects of the SimpliVity platform. One, that accelerated data efficiency, which we'll talk about in just a second, the built-in resiliency, the fact that backup, replication, DR automation, those are built in. And not only built in, but extensible through our API integration, which is actually kind of cool. And then the fact that we have, because we're doing data virtualization, which I know is kind of a funny term, it took me a while to get used to it. But if you think about server virtualization and all of the efficiencies that server virtualization brought to us, the operational efficiencies, physical consolidation, actually, server virtualization brought us some functional elimination. If you've ever, you remember Veritas Cluster Server, Sun Cluster.
Lots of things that were about hardware failure redundancy. We got that out of vSphere HA.
And now you check a box in VMware, and now you've got high availability for your application without having
quite
to do
a lot
special
of
coding.
Microsoft cluster environments were just about providing high availability, and we do that with vSphere HA.
That's correct. And so a lot of those benefits that we got out of server virtualization. Sometimes if I'm in a group, I'll actually throw it out to the group. Who here would say that server virtualization was a bad idea and we shouldn't do it and we should go back to all physical servers?
That'll be the DVA.
Yeah, sometimes. But the fact is that no one really argues that. We get so many benefits out of server virtualization. And data virtualization, SimpliVity customers are realizing those same benefits over and above server virtualization. So operational efficiencies, physical consolidation. We have a customer that went from 34 racks of equipment in one data center alone down to 3 racks and 4U of SimpliVity. And in mobility, server virtualization gave us mobility of the compute context, taking a running virtual machine, running operating system, we could move it from one hardware to another. SimpliVity is delivering mobility around the data context of the virtual machine.
Right. Awesome.
Okay.
Well, that's good to see where SimpliVity's at. Let's take a look over at the deploy. We're still in progress with deploying our second node. So I think this is a good time to slide on into the actually data virtualization platform, since we just talked about it. The video that I recorded with Brian on the data virtualization platform, please, Jeffrey. Welcome back to another vBrownBag Build Day video. Today we're continuing with the SimpliVity 380 deploy here at HPE in Houston. And joining me to dig a little under the covers of the SimpliVity platform is Brian Knudsen. What do you do for HPE, Brian?
Yeah, so I'm a senior technical marketing manager for SimpliVity within the HPE family. What that means is I spend a lot of time helping the product marketing team put together materials, making sure that everything that they develop is technically accurate, working with SAs and product management and occasionally engineers to understand the product as well as I can.
And of course that makes you the ideal person to explain to our audience what it is that this magic inside the SimpliVity platform is.
Yep, definitely, and that's what we'll start digging into the main software component of the SimpliVity solution, which we call the data virtualization platform.
So this is a good time to bring up the slides.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and jump into the slides here. And this first slide kind of lays out what we call our 3 main pillars of the DVP. So the first one is the data efficiency. We guarantee results with data efficiency. All data that comes in created by the virtual machines that are running on the HyperConverged platform are going to be deduped and compressed. That's always on, happens for all the data across the entire SimpliVity infrastructure. And it gets maintained in that state through its entire life cycle. So as we create backups, as we move data between sites, it all remains deduped and compressed. We never have to inflate it in order to send it to another site, for example.
And there's a whole heap of architecture underneath that is based on the expectation that all the data is deduped at start. And there's a whole lot of the nice features that are entirely reliant on that dedupe, which is why you can't turn it off. It's a fundamental basis for the entire product.
Yep, we use deduplication not just for saving capacity. That's actually kind of a side effect from what it was originally designed to do, which is to maintain data as efficiently as possible. So we kind of live by the mantra of the best I/O is the one you don't have to do. So if we
which is a Gene Undell quote.
Exactly. So long-term computer scientist who did a lot of work around the storage layers in the early days. So making sure that we don't ever create I/O that we don't need to. So if we're creating a backup and we can use metadata to do it instead of doing reads and writes.
Bulk copies of data the way traditional backups have been done.
Exactly. So we don't see that giant spike at 2 o'clock in the morning when backups kick off and everything backs up all at once. And this all happens through what we call our Omni Accelerator card. This is a PCIe device that we put into every single node that we offload that deduplication and compression effort to. So it helps to ensure that we can do all that in a regular performance manner. So we're not hurting performance by doing deduplication. It allows us to avoid having an extra hit on the core CPUs as well. So we're not stealing from customers' business applications. And that's really the underlying technology that really makes everything we do possible. So that takes us to the second item, which is the built-in resiliency, backup, and disaster recovery. And what that is as I talked about before, using that data efficiency to be able to do backups very, very quickly. Each backup is a full independent copy. We don't have any concepts of incrementals, differentials. There's no having to rebuild through multiple points in time to get to a certain point in time. It's, I want this point in time and it's there. It's completely disaggregated from the original virtual machine or any other previous backup. So ransomware breaks out, some sort of corruption happens in that virtual machine, you throw that virtual machine away and restore the backup.
And the backups are not accessible to the ransomware. It can't go out and encrypt like it could with some of the image-based backup tools that organizations are using.
Yeah, it'd have to infect the SimpliVity layer itself, and then get into the data virtualization platform. We'll see a little bit on how we kind of avoid the hypervisor even knowing what's going on in that regard. And what happens then is we can do those backups really fast. So we guarantee 60 seconds or less for any virtual machine up to a terabyte in size, creating that local backup. And as we'll see later in the day, that's actually pretty easy for us to do. So
yeah, I can recall seeing demos where it's the delay of vCenter being updated when we're doing clones, and we don't even update vCenter with a backup. Yeah. So yeah, that target's although that looks awesome, it's actually a really easy one for SimpliVity to achieve.
For sure, absolutely. Yeah, and we'll, not in this session, but in another session, we'll dig in even deeper and talk about really how that happens. And what that offers customers is the ability to do recovery point objectives in much more frequent fashion than they could before. So again, that spike of creating backups, we can completely avoid that and not have to worry about that. Makes DR very easy, gives customers the ability, we've had many customers be able to actually exceed business SLAs when it comes to disaster recovery. So that's nice. Huge benefit for the customers. And underlying all of that is what we call a RAIN plus RAID architecture. So we do a redundant array of independent nodes, so across all of our nodes. Within each node, we also do a RAID set, so we're protecting against loss of individual disks per node. And then should one node get lost, all the data is on another node.
So this is the defense in depth approach to availability.
Yeah, we sometimes call it belt and suspenders. Don't want those pants to fall down. So the last piece then becomes the global VM-centric management. And this is where we get into really enhancing the simplicity part of hyperconvergence and being able to take all these different functions that we've talked about and put them into a simple GUI. Eliminating some of the management that normally you would have to do, like around storage, for example. Very, very simply create a data store, and that's it. You're kind of done managing storage at that point. Then you simply create policies that are based around the virtual machines and when you want them to be backed up, how long you want them to be retained. So all of that overhead of management, making everything within this vSphere GUI in a VMware environment or the SEVMM environment with Hyper-V, and see a virtual machine, you right click on it and tell it what you want to do. I want to back it up, I want to clone it, whatever that might be.
And that's all policy driven rather than per VM set schedules. Correct. And it's apply a policy across groups of VMs.
Exactly, yep. So we simply create that policy, we apply it to data stores so that VMs have default policies that they will pick up based on simply being on the data store. You can go in and change individual virtual machines. If one day corporate decides, hey, we want everything backed up every 12 hours instead of every 24 hours, go in, update that one policy, everything's updated. It takes you a minute at most.
Right. But that policy is applied to a data store, but then you can override for individual VMs. So I don't have to have a data store per policy.
Correct. Yep. Each virtual machine can have its own policy if you wanted to create every policy. Generally, customers are creating, the gold, silver, bronze type approach usually is pretty sufficient for most customers.
Nice. Cool.
So let's dig in a little bit. We like to use graphics because it's easier to tell a story with a picture. So here what we have is what we call a cluster. So multiple SimpliVity nodes together in a single cluster, and that is based around the vSphere construct of cluster or the Hyper-V construct of a cluster. Simply by adding them in there, the nodes find each other and they say, hey, we're going to build a SimpliVity cluster together.
So they integrate into the hypervisor management to discover that cluster layer and then mirror it inside the software-defined storage component.
Yep. The only other way to do it would be through a CLI command because we don't have any other GUI. It's all through the hypervisor management. So what you see here is the data virtualization platform living between the hypervisor and the actual hardware. Within that DVP, we've got kind of three different layers. We've got the presentation layer, which is the interface that the hypervisor uses. So this is where the data stores live. This is where the VMDKs live. And all all the stuff in there is just made up. It's virtual. This is where the virtualization aspect of DVP comes in, where we're able to, we can create whatever data source. We can create them any size. We can resize them on demand, up or down, without having to jump through really any hoops on our end. The VMDKs themselves are really just constructs, presentations of the underlying data management layer, which is where we have a file system and an object store. So within that file system is what we call data containers. This is essentially the combination of all the data that defines a virtual machine. And then below that in the object store is where we actually store the data. And as you can see from the pretty lucky charms in there, that every one of those blocks is unique. There's no duplication between there.
So that's where the object store is the place where all of the unique objects are obviously enough stored.
Yes, exactly. And all this is complete SimpliVity IP. There's no taking ext3 and then modifying it and tweaking it and shoving an object store inside of it. Completely from the ground up, written by SimpliVity, specifically for, as you said, deduplication in mind, and the fact that this data is virtual and will be presented out whatever way we need to whatever hypervisor we happen to be talking to.
And when we're talking about object stores, a lot of people working in enterprise IT will be used to them as being a low performance, eventually consistent. There's a whole heap of characteristics that are driven by the S3 AWS type object store. This is not that kind of object store.
Nope. We are an enterprise technology. We were designed for core data center workloads. So when things go in the object store, they're there, they're solid, they're immutable. So no one can go in and say, oh, I need to change that particular block. If a VM comes in and wants to change a block, that's a new object in the object store at that point. And we'll get into that in that deeper dive. Yeah. So when we want to create a clone of a virtual machine, we can take that VM1, that data container there, and when a clone happens, we copy that data container and we represent it up. And now it's a new virtual machine. At that point, we'll integrate into the vCenter and we'll say, hey, you've got a new virtual machine, a new VMDK that's been presented.
So how big is this thing that we've just cloned to clone a virtual machine?
That's probably on the order of kilobytes.
Right.
So very, very little data action that needs to happen, even if it's a 1 terabyte virtual machine.
And does it make any difference if it is a big virtual machine, how much we copy?
Nope, because it's, again, when we get into the deep dive, it makes it a little bit more obvious about how we're doing that, but it's essentially we're copying a piece of metadata that then references that same set of data, because it's 100% duplicate. So there's no I/O on the object store and the actual blocks that need to occur.
Kind of by definition, when I say clone something, I'm not going to create anything more that's unique.
Yes.
I certainly shouldn't.
Yes, absolutely, and that's really the concept. And the advantage to customers is, from an operations perspective, I want to create a clone. I want it done right now. The sooner it gets done, the faster I can move on to the next thing. So similar thing happens if I look at VM3 there, and I want to be able to take a backup of that virtual machine. I can simply copy that data container, mark it as a backup instead of a virtual machine, and notice it doesn't get presented up. So it's staying completely within the data management layer. And since it's not going through the presentation layer, the hypervisor has no idea what's going on there. And this is where we get that level of protection where, unless they can dig in and actually access and corrupt the data management layer, the DVP itself, there's no knowledge of that from a malware perspective.
Right. And the clone and the backup looked quite similar.
Yes, yeah. At this level, pretty much the same set of code. So again, it's a metadata copy. Nothing changes in the object store from the actual data perspective, and happens in a matter of seconds. This is where we get to that 60 seconds or less aspect of things. So again, more or less the same operation. When I'm restoring that virtual machine, I make a copy of that data container. That copy of that data container really is just, here's a new metadata that's exactly the same as this last one. I'm going to present it, register it, allow the user to power it on. Once it powers on, then things start to shift, because that, each operating system boot is a little bit unique, and it's going to write some data, and it's going to
write some logs to say I've started up, if nothing else.
Exactly, and that timestamp alone is going to make it unique. So now the data shifted a little bit underneath. It's no longer, VM4 is no longer the same metadata that backup was, and that backup was the same metadata as VM2. Of course, VM2 drifted at one point, so now they're all unique data containers as soon as data starts to change. So now if we zoom out a level, we have this concept of what we call the federation. And we have that data virtualization platform extend across multiple clusters now. And this is where we get that ability to do remote backups and maintain that deduplication compression, because they're all talking a common language. So here we've got the DVP going across 3 different sites. We've got the presentation and data management layer in each one. And of course, we've got that file system where we've got the metadata level. Think of these data containers as simply instruction sets on how to put together all the different blocks. So we show that in a little bit more detail, and of course we have the object store underneath. Very simple example, we can see a lot of duplicate data in an individual virtual machine. But if I want to create a backup of this virtual machine from that Boston to Tokyo data center, I simply share that metadata table. Now at that point, the Japan or the Tokyo data center has the ability to say, okay, well, what don't I already have? At this point, we're not having a conversation about what have I already sent you or what has changed, but the receiving side actually defining, I don't know these pieces. I've never seen these blocks of data. This metadata is new to me. Can you send over the actual data? So at that point, the Boston data center is going to say, okay, here you go. Here are those 2 blocks that you were missing. And now I can fully reconstruct that backup, that virtual machine that I moved over. And this is where, we've had customers do DR, have multiple sites who never would have been able to do it before.
And it's particularly up in Boston to Tokyo, there's going to be some slow links, high latency. Yep. This is going to be a challenging place to move any data.
Yep.
And bulk backups would be very problematic across that.
Yeah, even if it's a satellite connection between the two,
right.
We've had some good success stories around that. So now if I zoom out even further and show, a very complex, a very global environment, I can see I've got a lot of different sites. Those 2-node sites are probably remote offices. That really big site there in India is, maybe it's DR for every site. Every site's going to back up there. Or maybe it's just the APAC region that's going to back up there. I've got all these different pieces. So from a management perspective, I could do one vCenter across all of them. And that's perfectly legit from a SimpliVity design perspective. It may not be the best practice to do it from a management aspect, so maybe you divide that up by regional, or maybe you do a vCenter per site. We support all the configurations, and it's kind of whatever works best for the customer. Understanding vCenter's role in the vSphere environment is about the same as its role is within the SimpliVity environment. It's there for management interface. If it's down, everything continues to operate. You just are a little crippled on how to do things.
The administrator can't do their job, but the actual staff using the system can continue.
Yep, exactly. Above that, we have a series of different automation platforms, cloud platforms, whatever you will, for higher level management that we've supported over the years. And now, with being part of HPE, having OneView coming soon as a management platform as well. All that's automated by REST APIs. So we have REST APIs that allow all of these things to happen and allow higher level management tools to be able to access our underlying technology to be able to do clones and backups without having to give an end user access directly to the vSphere client.
And that's for integration into whatever it is that you
Absolutely.
Use automation for the processes.
Yeah. Ticket automation, DR automation, any of those types of things can access our REST API without any problems.
Great, Brian. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
good to have a look at the data virtualization platform. As Brian said, we will have a much deeper look inside the DVP in a coming video. And stay tuned for all of the remaining videos of this SimpliVity 380 build day with HPE.
Thanks, Al.
So that was the DVP overview, and while it was running, those of you who are watching closely will have noticed just down there somewhere, is the progress and successful deployment of the second node. So we now have 2 nodes in our SimpliVity cluster.
That's correct. We have full HA. There's no single points of failure in this cluster. We are switch connected, although at 2 nodes that's not required. We could direct connect the nodes on the back end.
All right. So we've got enough nodes to be production ready, but we're not production ready yet.
No, part of our post-deployment checks was to add in that additional NIC. You remember during the deployment process, we only chose one uplink for each of the 2 vSwitches, one for the 1 gig, one for the 10 gig. So now we just, part of the process is to add that other NIC, so we have NIC redundancy.
Another 1 gig NIC to the management switch.
And then add the other 10 gig port.
To another guy.
There we go.
and add 10 gig. And I've noticed in here that when eventually it updates, initially the second NIC shows up as disconnected or faulty, but when you refresh it a couple of times sometimes, honest, it'll come back. There we go. Comes back and it's properly negotiated 10 gig. And that'll be to do with my switch being multifunction and taking a little while to negotiate up for the core switches. So I'll do the same on the second node.
All right.
Add a second 1 gig NIC for management. And I'm trying not to get too frustrated with the web client here, as pretty much everybody does these days. So it's a reality of what we need to work with.
Yep.
Okay, so now we have NIC redundancy.
There we go. It's not so bad. It's kind of like the ribbon in the Office suite, right?
Yeah,
Frustrates you at first, and then you get used to it.
after a while, it's the only way you know.
Yep.
And then we're going to pop back in here, and
So we just do a federation show, and
I got to restart the session because it's timed me out.
as it should, my good man, as it should.
As it should. It is a security feature. And that password, and it was SVT-federation show.
There we go.
And I've increased my font size, so you should actually be able to read this in the video. So we have 2 nodes, IP addresses 71 and 72. Nice green column of alive and connected together with this layout.
So this looks good. We like this. So why don't you go ahead and while we're here, do the SVT data store share for host 2.
Data store.
SimpliVity with a lower v.
SimpliVity-1-1. Host is host2.lab.local.
There we go. Oh, yeah, I missed an A.
This time, I did indeed. There's no DNS record for that. No, I don't want to
Probably
proceed.
not. That would be the adaptive DNS.
Yes.
Adapts around your typos.
This might be the intent driven. I intended to type this correctly, but I failed.
There we go.
There we
That
go.
looks much better.
Okay.
All right.
So now back in vCenter, I've got my ESX server, and it can see the SimpliVity 1.1 data store. Great.
There we go.
Why don't I put some VMs on there?
Oh, that sounds like a good idea.
Let's start with this one. So I'm just going to take the standard Migrate wizard and just change the storage. And wait for the updates.
We're loading.
And I'm going to go with data store default so that it doesn't complain about not matching up to my vSAN data store policy. And away we go. And then we can see our recent task list and my Ubuntu machine, which from memory is about 4 gigs in size. So it's not huge, but it will take a moment or two to migrate. Yeah, 4 gigs of storage will take a moment or two to migrate across. Oh, there we go. It's finished migrating. So, or at least it's 100% complete, which is as close to finished as we like to see. Just check out data stores and make sure it's across. So it's all the way across. So now,
So if you wanted to, you could right-click on the production cluster and go to all SimpliVity actions. Excuse me, all HPE SimpliVity actions, and view capacity.
Mm-hmm.
And this is showing you the effective and the actual capacity. So for your one little system that you put on there, you put 2.5 gig of live VM data. You don't have any backups. You don't have any replications. And we've stored that on 1.2 gig. So effectively gotten about a 2.2 to 1. So for a little bitty thing, you know, first virtual machine that you put on there is
and
right in line with what we'd expect.
I don't have my actions available at that point. Let's migrate this virtual machine onto the cluster as well.
Sure.
Since it's just using the storage. And this is this 2-stage migration because we're using a shared data store. I can do a vMotion and I can move it across to one of the SimpliVity nodes. And if all of my networking is set up correctly, you know what I haven't got is I haven't set up all my port groups on this side.
Oh, yep, we haven't done that.
So let me pop out into a PowerShell, PowerCLI window, and also let me just check my script that I'm going to do the right SimpliVity node, 01, which is on 21, and I'll just, I always like having a script to do these repeated tasks, and here's a script for this. So it's just going to create essentially all of the virtual machine port groups. There's a little bit of stuff in there that I'm not using anymore because I was going to create VM kernel ports for IP storage and vMotion, but we decided not to go down that road. And then I need my second host. And this time add the port groups to my second host. And if I...
What was that term that you used for this? Advanced laziness?
Advanced laziness, yeah. Yeah, so I like to spend as little effort as possible to achieve a lot, and sometimes that involves writing a script to do those tasks for me.
And it helps you later on too, when you're trying to remember what exactly did I do last
What
time.
it was that I did. And now compatibility succeeds. I have my port groups. I have a bunch of other port groups in there. Where we go. Yeah, go do the vMotion, go drop it off, and watch our recent tasks and find out whether all of our networking is set up correctly for vMotion. When it's sitting there at 21%, I'm a little concerned because that's where it'll pause if there is a network problem. With vSphere 6.5, it's 21% is where it starts actually moving data across the vMotion network. It is the new version of what used to be 10% back on ESX 3 and 4. So I suspect because it's
probably what
there,
it is. I wonder if we need to enable vMotion on the storage port group for your existing hosts.
Existing hosts only have vMotion enabled on the storage port group, so it won't be that one. He says crossing his fingers and hoping that he saw that correctly. So let's take a quick look at that. On my VM kernel adapters, I created this VM kernel adapter here, which matches.
It is enabled for vMotion.
And yes, enabled services as vMotion. Host 2 also has the same configuration of an SVT store port group, which VM kernel port enabled for vMotion, and these are on the 172.31. So unless I put the wrong IP address in here on this 172.31, it's also enabled for vMotion. And finally, this guy is enabled for vMotion. But when he's sitting there at 21%, we got something under there that's making things a little unhappy. So I think one of the things I wanted to do was clone across a fairly large volume of data, and we really need to get that kicked off now because pulling, in this case, 0.5 terabyte of data off my vSAN, I'm not even sure that it's going to finish while we're still doing the live stream, but I'd like to get it started so that we have a chance that it will. So I'm just going to clone my entire vApp here. This vApp contains 6 virtual machines, and its total size is just on 0.5 terabyte. So I'm going to clone that across to our SimpliVity cluster, and there we go. The vMotion has failed because it's trying to get to 172.17. That's interesting. Well, I'll come back and have a look at that in a minute. Next, clone destination is going to be the production data cluster. That's a point we better turn on DRS and HA in our cluster.
If you do that, then we'll need to have that disabled to deploy the next node.
You're absolutely right, because we can't. We have to have HA disabled, but we can have DRS enabled. Was my recollection. We got a DRS.
Yeah.
We got a DRS error, which was actually driven by HA.
Yep.
So I'm going to turn on DRS, but I'm not going to turn on HA at this point. And now I'm going to try and clone that vApp again, an existing vApp into the production data center. That's better. Validation says all good. This one is going to be the vBrownBag 702. We'll just dump it directly in the data center. It's going to live on SimpliVity 1-1. That's going to use the newly created Net 902 port group. And that fella's going to take a little while to complete. It's going to roll through moving 0.5 terabyte of data in. So while it's doing that, I think we need to do a couple of things.
Okay.
One of the things is we'll have Brian off camera at our third node. I don't think you need to see that wizard to create another node 5 times, so we'll let Brian have the great joy of running through that wizard at least once today.
He was just saying this morning that he needs more experience with that. So we'll...
Excellent, so he's going to get to use that. We, on the other hand, will deploy another node. We're going to deploy the first node into the DR cluster, so we'll go through that deploy wizard to get him started. Because one of the things is that this time that deploy manager will only let us deploy 1 node at a time per cluster. And this is why we can't parallel deploy all 3 of them for the cluster. All right, we'll do a new deployment. And again, we're going to log back into vCenter.
I don't think, there we go.
And yep, very happy for that. But we're going to go to the far side, and we're going to deploy a node into the DR cluster. Now, in most environments, that DR cluster would be somewhere remote and all the IP addresses would be different. But because I haven't set up a remote network, we're in the same subnet, and we'll just use the same IP address range. So we'll grab that same configuration file.
Really, the thing that distinguishes it is at the cluster level. So we've defined a new cluster that defines a new SimpliVity, a new element in the SimpliVity Federation.
And we've gone all the way to a new data center, so it's very clear at the vSphere layer that they're not the same location, that they are physically different locations. Going out and doing our scan, so we've hoovered up 2 of the 5 nodes that were waiting for us. The nodes that we have used so far all end in a 5.9 some letter, and that's the factory direct ones that you saw unboxed in the video. We also have 2 other nodes here that are different serial number sequence, and we'll just grab ourselves one of those. Because we're doing a new cluster, we get to choose the hypervisor version again. 6.5 update 1 seems good to me. And again, select your management NIC. Select your storage NIC. Numbering's different.
There we go.
Retype your password many times. It's kind of
we want to make sure that you know it. These are important passwords to know.
It's also good not to have it in an XML file.
Yes.
Which is what we had saved down there. Hey, I typed it the same 4 times.
Good job.
This is going to be our node number 4, so we're going to change the IP or the last digit to 4. All the same VLANs and everything in here. Again, in a production environment, you're going to be in a different data center. You're likely to be using different VLANs and probably different octets on your IP addresses in here. All the values read out of the XML file look good. 4, 4, 4, 4, and 4.
Very good.
It's good that I don't have to type very much because we've seen how accurate my typing is. You wouldn't think that I got most of my income from typing, would you? Waiting for the validation process. So this is a new cluster.
First node in a new cluster.
First node in a new cluster. So all of the adjacency of storage and federation is not going to be tested.
But probably we're going to see some tests of adjacency to the other cluster.
But of the
connectivity
across the management.
test, but it would be over exactly correct.
So management is the only one that's routed between, or has to be routed between the clusters.
Yeah. That's correct.
So we don't have previously deployed clusters in the same physical data center, so the MTU tests aren't relevant. Scroll through, check all of our other elements are progressing along. Let's just take a quick look while those tests are running and see how our recent tasks are going. So we're getting nice progress. This is not an accurate 43% complete was our experience. We had an early feeling that things were going extremely well when we did this in the dry run, but it turned out that it still took quite a bit longer. And our vMotion has failed. That's right, the vMotion failed because of a message about the 17. The 172.17 network. So one of the VM kernels in here, and it was 32. Oh, is it vSAN configuration putting back? There we go. We'll just turn off vMotion on the vSAN network because that's what's causing our incompatibility. I don't have that vSAN network out down to my SimpliVity nodes. So with that turned off, and obviously the vSAN health check is going to turn it back on again later. With that turned off, I can take my Ubuntu virtual machine and drop him down into the production data center. He's already on. Yeah, we tried this before and it failed. Thank you for letting me know. I believe I've resolved that issue. And we'll just go finish on him. And then we'll let him stew while we go back and check that all of our tests completed. And look at that,
Green
lots
is
of
good.
greens, lots of greens all the way down. And also it says next, which it didn't say
That's
before
correct.
the test completed. So we'll go and allow that
Ready?
node to go ahead and deploy.
And there we go.
All right, so first node in the second cluster in the DR cluster is underway. And again, that'll take another 20-25 minutes to deploy, the same as the other nodes did.
And so you can see, we estimate 1 hour per deployment plus 1 hour per node. Here we have 5 nodes that would normally be, we would request a 6-hour window.
To complete
we're
the activities.
Clearly well within that 6-hour window. We usually are. In fact, the 2 times that I've seen us go outside of our window were 2 times that were specifically issues related to the customer environment. One of them was kind of a bizarre, I don't know what it was, but he had a new PC or had just refreshed it or something, and it was just excruciatingly slow, and we weren't able to get anything done on the customer's system. So,
right. So now our vMotion has completed. We have our Ubuntu virtual machine down here in the cluster, so we have a running workload VM in the cluster, and so we're able
there was much rejoicing
to see all of our SimpliVity actions on it. At least we will shortly. I'm just going to do a shared nothing migrate of another virtual machine while we're here, just because this is the other alternative that doesn't rely on presenting that NFS data store. And come on, web client. There it is. Push it down into the production cluster and tell it that I want to store it on the data store default policies on that SimpliVity data store. Service network all matches up, so that succeeds. Normal priority for our double vMotion. DRS says data store is not compatible. Did I not change the storage policy? So change the storage policy. We'll go to thin provisioned explicitly since it's an NFS data store. That should have been auto-selected. That's an interesting fault. All right.
Well, this is just proof that it's live.
It is, and that we didn't try run test that particular methodology. Well, we have node being deployed out here. We have a clone still in progress for that vApp full of virtual machines. So I think this might be a good time to switch out to one of the recorded segments where we looked at the scalability of the cluster, since we are scaling out an existing cluster as Brian adds the third node to it. Scalability, please. Welcome back to another vBrownBag Build Day video. We're continuing with our HPE SimpliVity 380 discussions, and again joined by Richard Greenwald to talk about the solution.
Yes. Hey, Alistair. Great to be back. So with the HPE SimpliVity 380 Gen 10, there's a lot of flexibility in terms of scalability. Customers can scale up or scale out for their individual requirements or whatever deployment they're using. So in terms of scale up, they have a single socket CPU option.
And that's new, isn't it?
Yes,
that's kind of scaled down, isn't it?
Yes, it is. You're right. But that can save on cost. Licensing is great for remote and branch offices. But they can add a second CPU and also all the different core options within the system. So you can add memory there as well. But it's not just that. Sure, a customer can deploy a single node and they would have local backups available, and that's great for remote and branch office. but they can scale up by adding additional nodes within a cluster. So you have this concept of a cluster where not only is data backed up within
So are we
RAID.
talking about a vSphere cluster here, or is there another construct going on?
The SimpliVity cluster, yes, and the storage cluster maps with the SimpliVity cluster.
So when I'm talking about a vSphere cluster that I'm used to, this is just going to be a storage cluster on these nodes that matches exactly my vSphere cluster.
Within it, yes.
Nicely.
So definitely a lot of flexibility there. And so you have this concept of RAID plus RAIN backup. It's not just the data being backed up across the hard drives within the node, but your nodes are mirrored in say, a 2-node cluster. So you have backup there as well. If a particular node goes down for any reason, your VMs and your data are still supported.
So we have that idea of having the RAID inside the node that we're very used to from physical server implementations, but also that we have a collection of the nodes in the cluster, much like a normal vSphere HA cluster.
Exactly.
We have the storage cluster doing the same thing. Yeah.
Yep. So very similar. But also you have this concept of a federation or a container of multiple clusters within there. So this is usually across sites. And so it's not just backing up data at a local center, but you can back up data to a different location. So a lot of times there's a 2+1 configuration within a federation. And so even if a site goes down, all your data is still backed up, and that provides a lot of uptime for our customers.
And that's the disaster recovery kind of functionality where you have a remote data center with a full copy of your data.
Exactly. And since it's all deduped and compressed and it's policy-based, customers don't have to worry, did I back up that particular VM or that particular set of data?
And did the backup job complete?
Exactly. It's a lot smaller, so you can move it across locations, even if there's, say, a slow link or anything like that.
So when you're thinking about a single node scaling, we often have this discussion as we're designing a vSphere environment of how much compute, how much memory do I put? Do I have a small number of really large ESX servers, or do I have a large number of really small ones? Are there constraints, are there limits that we've got in this? Well, it's Reliant Gen 10, so presumably that the constraints are really quite large.
There's a lot of options in terms of what CPUs and memory can be in there, quite a lot. But if per se a customer needed to add additional compute capability, with the SimpliVity platform, they can actually add in other servers that do not have the SimpliVity hardware in there. And they don't get the storage benefits, but you get the additional CPU. So if a customer has a lot of existing servers, even if they're not SimpliVity, not HPE, they can use the CPU benefits in their cluster and gain that performance advantage.
So that's if I've got adequate storage capacity and I want to not buy more storage capacity, just buy more compute capacity. Is there any sort of reverse option of that where, we talk about buying hyperconverged is often like buying an inkjet cartridge where you have to buy all of the colors even though you've only run out of black. What about if I run out of other resources?
You run out of storage, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other.
So you can, so if you run out of storage, you can always just add another 2U node into a cluster, into a federation, and you get the additional storage there as well. We have different storage sizes available for our customers. So if you just have a remote and branch office and you need just a little bit of storage and you get the benefit of that offsite data availability, that's great. But also if you're in a core data center and you need a lot of storage, there's some large sizes available for our customers.
Right. So we've got scale up a single node, scale out a group of nodes in a cluster, scale usually across geographic locations for that group of clusters in the federation. Is there situations where I might scale that federation as a group of clusters inside a single data center?
You could. If you wanted to segregate or isolate individual workloads, whether it's a database for licensing reasons or VDI graphics, you can have multiple clusters in the same rack. There's not rules preventing that, but you could separate them for licensing points of view or something like that.
Right, so whatever kind of segregation I want of my workloads, I could have multiple clusters in the same data center. They don't have to be in different data centers.
Clusters. Exactly.
So we talked quite a bit about scale up, but with this, particularly the new configuration where there's the really small amounts of storage and a single CPU, there must be some scale down. I mean, you can't go to no nodes, but a lot of hyperconverged, you've got a 3-node minimum.
Exactly.
What's the story here?
So you can go down to a single node minimum in a cluster here. You have all the RAID across the hard drives. You have the SimpliVity OmniStack Accelerator card. You get all those benefits. And so yes, you can have a single node cluster with the HPE solution, HPE SimpliVity solution.
So if I've got a single node, I've only got local storage, I've got the availability as this node must be up.
Exactly.
presumably I want to ship backup somewhere else. So I don't imagine that a single node at a single site is the end of the story.
Right, so you could add it to a federation and you could back up the data from that single node to a cluster somewhere else and be remote backup. So if the site went down, you'd still have all your data, but you don't have to buy, say, any more than a single node for a location.
And that'd be really useful if I had 300 retail stores or 10,000 retail stores.
Yes.
Because that's definitely a place where per unit price is really important.
Exactly, and there's a single socket configuration available, and that helps with that.
Well, keep watching for some more of the HPE SimpliVity 380 build day videos. We've got a bunch of them out, and you'll see some more with Richard as well as with some of our other experts. And that was scalability for us, scaling out and up and across. Before we went to that video, we were having a little challenge with the enhanced vMotion, and I think it's highlighting one of the things that as I've stopped teaching VMware's training courses, I've become less familiar with some of the intricacies of actually operating it. So you may have seen in the little bottom left corner that we worked out what we were doing wrong, that when we were choosing to do this enhanced vMotion, this Migrate, we were choosing the compute first, which to me was just changing the way the UI would behave, but in fact it seems to also change the way the enhanced vMotion occurs. And so we want to change the storage first and then do the vMotion at the end. It seemed to be doing it the opposite way around. So we'll come along and we'll say I want to select the storage first, and I want, in my lab data center, I want to go to my SimpliVity 1.1 storage, and then I can choose my cluster to migrate into. And because I don't want to wait for it to load the cluster as well, I'll just nominate one of the hosts in the cluster. And then the rest of the wizard goes through and it says, yes, we're good to go. So we can finish out on that one.
Yeah. Sometimes it's just how you ask the question.
It is absolutely. And yeah, having asked the question dozens of times in different ways. So I'm a creature of habit. I will do do it the same way multiple times rather than doing the investigation of trying it everywhere around. So we've got a couple of migrations in flight, and at the moment it's moving 0.5 terabyte of VMs across our network, and that's the piece that's
and a couple of deployments,
time.
Which actually is one of the points in our hyper guarantee, is that we guarantee availability during adding and removing nodes from the federation. So what we're doing is deploying a single node for, I guess, our first node in the disaster recovery data center, and that brings up the question around single node use cases.
When would you run?
When would you run a single node? And there are
the default answer for me as a VMware guy is, well, never.
You don't.
I want redundancy. I always want multiple nodes.
So as a SimpliVity SA, it actually took a discussion with Rich Kucharski, who has moved on, but I was like, hey, Rich, you gotta help me understand here, because I recognized that we were proposing solutions that were not commercially viable with HA. In other words, we were doing with a 2-node minimum, and he really listened and helped me get on board and understand that there's really 2 questions that I ask my prospects when they hear about single nodes. Of course, it's very economical.
Yeah, half the VMware licensing cost, half the hardware cost.
And we use RAID, so we're protecting the data that's on that node. But when you make that choice for a single node in any data center, you are, by default, choosing for disaster recovery over high availability. You've made that conscious decision that high availability is not important enough for me that I want to pay that.
It's not financially viable.
It's not financially viable for this particular use case. And so I'm electing DR. Well, we all know, or should know, that DR means that there's a recovery point objective and a recovery time objective. And so the first question that I ask my prospects is, can you achieve that recovery point objective and that recovery time objective with the SimpliVity solution with one node in that remote location or wherever, and SimpliVity infrastructure somewhere else? Because in the worst case, something happens here, you have to restore those services somewhere else. So you have to be able to achieve an RPO and an RTO. Typically
and
on
you have to have
SimpliVity.
an application that's going to work with the servers remote as well. You have to.
That's question number 2. That's exactly correct. So question number 2 is it going to work, right? Can your users handle that additional latency? Because you're going to have additional round trip latency. If you answer yes to both those questions, then a single node is appropriate. If you say no to either one of those, then we need to take a closer look and maybe look at putting high availability in that particular location.
And the good thing is that this is a site-by-site decision. You can say,
Exactly correct.
maybe I'm a retail organization. If I'm pushing down to a location where I'm only going to have 3 staff, then I'll put a single node there. But if I'm pushing to a location where I've got 15 staff, got 6 checkouts running concurrently, well, the cost of downtime
economics
is
are
too
going to
high.
be different in that remote office. That's correct, and that's the beauty of the the 2U form factor and modular scale that SimpliVity has. We do have a grocery chain out of the Midwest. They are employee owned, and so what they do is they have one node in each store. I think they have about 28 or so stores, and so that each node replicates to the next store, and that store is the previous store's DR target. They're regionally located, so that works for them, right?
And that gives them a lower latency in that DR situation than going back to some central head office that may be much further away. If it's 2 sides of town, is lower latency than one town to the next.
That's correct. And so those are typically when a prospect says that a single node is of interest to them, we'll go down through those discussion points. But disaster recovery is one of those we see a lot where a single node is completely sufficient. It's really an insurance policy against something that they don't think will ever happen to the production side. It's actually, I would say, it's the exception, not the rule, where I talk to people that want to have high availability and disaster recovery.
So most people will want both, but occasionally you get places where the high availability is cost prohibitive for customers.
Yeah. And so sometimes what we'll say is, and this is the beauty of the SimpliVity naming convention of the Federation, right? Sometimes we'll say a 3-node SimpliVity solution isn't necessarily equivalent to a 3-node competitive solution, because typically that 3-node competitive solution is RF2, it's 3 nodes in a high availability cluster, whereas the 3-node SimpliVity solution is 2 nodes for high availability in one data center, and they replicate to another data center for disaster recovery. We call that a 2+1. So functionally, you got more capability
So
with the same node count.
second use case around single node, so we have that one where it's a branch office, but also the second use case for that single node data center is the DR location for your 2-node primary location. So this is a smaller organization that are running a couple of dozen VMs on 2 nodes in production. And should a failure occur, they can bring up a sufficient amount of those on 1 node at a remote location. And that may be a colo, where they're paying by the rack U every month for that.
Yep. Plenty of those, and if you think about it, when I size, I always size for high availability, so making sure that we can have a node failure, right? And if you think about it, the 2+1 is sort of that perfect space, right? You have all 3 nodes are exactly the same, and you have HA with the 2 and DR that can run everything in the remote location.
Excellent. Well, that's some interesting use cases for the single node. Jeffrey, we have a wider video that I did with Brian on use cases in general. Can we run that up and just run through what all the use cases were? Welcome to the vBrownBag Build Day with HPE SimpliVity here in Houston. And to talk about some use cases where customers are seeing benefits from the SimpliVity platform, I'm joined by Brian Knudsen.
Hey, Al.
So, where have customers found great value from SimpliVity's solutions?
Yeah. So we started with a core data center. We wanted to work on that, continuing the virtualization evolution. VMware came in, did amazing things in our data center. We wanted to continue to do those amazing things for customers. So we really focused on that core data center where most customers were getting the most value out of VMware. So we wanted to make sure it could perform. We wanted to make sure it could protect. Were really the 2 of the biggest use cases. The way that we protect, of course, is based in data efficiency, deduplication compression, maintaining it in that state. Natural evolution of that then became, well, what about remote sites? So Robo, SMB, small offices, multiple data centers became another big use case for us, where moving data between sites was an important thing for customers. Because of the fact that we dedupe it and compress it, we were able to move it between sites by maintaining it in that state.
And that very much reduced amount of data that's moved every time you're doing that deduped and compressed copy means that customers aren't paying nearly as much for their WAN bandwidth down to each site, and that would make you very popular with anybody with a lot of sites.
Yeah, absolutely, and very popular with customers who simply can't get bigger pipes, whether it's they need to get data moved across there because they have to, or because they assume they can't ever do disaster recovery, for example, because they just can't get their data across.
There's a drilling rig somewhere out in the middle of nowhere, but it's doing exploratory, and so there's high value data there.
Yes.
Yet it's in a dangerous place where it could get destroyed at any moment.
Yep, that's exactly right, and that's an exact customer story that we have. That where they had a satellite uplink.
I have to say I wasn't prepped for that. I just made it up off the top of my head. So.
No, I mean the satellite is about as bad as bandwidth as you could possibly hope for, and the most latency you could possibly hope for when you're trying to sell a efficiency across WAN story. And we have a customer that has a ship out attached to an oil rig, and they couldn't get their data out in a 24-hour period, and that was putting things at risk. Even when that ship came to shore, they didn't stay on shore long enough to get the data off with a hard wire. So they were looking for WAN efficiencies. They heard some of our story. They said, well, we do have an issue in this small data center we have. We have a management problem because we don't have IT people on this limited staff ship. So the interface capabilities of managing multiple sites in one interface, the WAN efficiencies that we provide, and the reduction in the data center were bang, bang, bang for that customer. It was an easy sell at that point. So that hit those two main points that we were really aiming for. Over time, we've seen VDI evolve as a big use case for us. It took a little bit of tweaking and preparation of the underlying file system that we have in order to really accommodate that use case. And unlike most hyperconverged vendors, we didn't start with VDI. We were really focused on the core data center. So the performance of VDI is really skyrocketed for us to the point where we've kind of overtaken everybody in our capabilities for VDI, and actually worked very closely with Log and VSI to get validated results and be able to prove and show that, yeah, these are real results.
These are legit results. They're not pie in the sky numbers that have been faked up. And that was, I know my first reaction when I heard about those Log and VSI results were the testing methodology must be wrong because these are not the numbers you expect from a two-socket server.
Yeah, and knowing the not great results we had initially, when I first saw those results, I was even more baffled. And to be able to see that time and time again, we've had Log and VSI validate results 3 different times, is just amazing. Having done a lot of VDI in the past myself. Of course, cloud computing's been a big one for us as well. They've got simplification is important in a cloud computing use case. We've got service providers who use SimpliVity as their underlying technology. So being able to get in there, simplify the interface, our capabilities around REST API, being able to automate the environment is huge for them, especially when they need to protect customer data, move customer data between, maybe they have multiple sites. And integration with products like vRealize Automation make that even more appealing to some of them. And of course, that's a huge part of our industry these days. So we're kind of proud to be able to help support cloud computing
providers too.
Yeah, and they'll be part of HPE, and stories around hybrid IT fits great with us because it ends up being very easy to implement on-site, very easy to implement up in the cloud, and very easy to tie them together is a big part of the HPE value prop these days.
And then lots of API around it in order to be software driven through some sort of orchestration system that overarches.
Yep, exactly. Obviously, in a core data center, tier 1 applications is a big use case. The vast majority of our customers are running SQL Server and having very good results with it. It's a high-end application, and we've been able to serve those very successfully for customers.
But usually when a DBA hears that the SQL Server is going to be placed on deduplicated and compressed storage, their first answer is no, turn all of that off. I don't want it because it's going to make my performance suffer.
Yep. And with SimpliVity, with the Omni Stack Accelerator card that we put in there to offload deduplication and compression, we're not taking capabilities away from the SQL servers in order to service that, and we're also being able to process it faster than you could with a generic Intel CPU, and be able to get through those calculations a lot faster. I think we're going to talk about that in another video, exactly how we write data through. So yeah, in the end, we end up being able to service it very, very quickly and very, very efficiently. Data protection is a huge one. We've talked about that a little bit. So when customers, most SimpliVity people, when we go up and we present and we're going to talk about data protection specifically, one of the questions I always ask is, who here likes their backup product? And of course, nobody has a great story there.
Everybody likes the backup product that they've just decided to buy,
yes,
but have not yet implemented.
Yes, yeah, give it 6 months and your tune may change. In fact, we've had customers buy high-end integrated backup solutions that a year later need to replace their servers and storage. They look at SimpliVity, they say, we love what you have, we don't care about the data protection piece. Okay, that's fair. They saw enough value, they still bought it. And a year later, now they're 2 years into that integrated backup product, a year into the SimpliVity backup, they've been playing with it, and they realize that there are certain, I need a restore for ransomware, I need a quick restore for a developer, quick clone for some other use case for testing and whatnot. They find that they've got a lot of value there, and they start cutting back on their use of those other third-party products.
And particularly since they're typically an additional license beyond the infrastructure, whereas the backup and the SimpliVity is all built into the one price. Exactly.
So SimpliVity is not a net add, it's something every customer has, and they can choose how much they use it. And we've seen, 90% of our customers are using SimpliVity data protection at some level, and over half of those customers that are using it have eliminated some piece of their data protection scheme. So whether that be WAN replication, whether that be actual licensing of a VM or a backup exec or Commvault, something like that, they may not eliminate it completely, but they're at least reducing the amount of it and cutting out some chunk of that. So it's a significant cost savings for customers. The last one we kind of talk about is test dev. And in test dev, we're talking about a lot of duplication of data. We're taking that virtual machine that's in production that has an error, and we're sending it back to the developers to say, why is this error existing? We're taking stuff from development and making it very easy to move it up into a test environment without having to package and redeploy that code. Mm-hmm. So by being able to manipulate things, move things around, take quick backups so I can test something crazy that's most likely going to make it blow up, but let's see how it blows up so we know how far to push it, makes it very easy for customers to deal with.
Nice, and of course the REST API on the SimpliVity platform would play nicely into the automation tools that the test and dev engineers will be using.
Yeah, absolutely. So custom code, very easy for them to figure out how it works through a web GUI that we've provided on top of it, for them to figure out how it works and then be able to code that in and put it into anything that can call REST API.
Well, thank you very much, Brian.
Yep.
And thank you for watching. Do join us for more vBrownBag videos on the SimpliVity 380 Build Day, and keep watching the live stream of the Build Days. While I was chatting with Brian on the video, our third node, how many nodes are we up to now? Our install of the node in the new cluster completed successfully. And I've started the process for installing the second node in the DR cluster. And I believe by now Brian's node in the primary cluster has completed building. So we've got a 3+2 and heading for a 3+1.
Correct.
Heading for a 3+2. So we should do the post-install checks on the cluster and make sure everything you can see on the federation.
But you're going to time out here.
Oh yeah, I'm going to need to log in.
I'll put you in timeout.
Have I been that naughty already?
I'll log in and you can get out of timeout.
Okay. That means I have to remember to type my password correctly.
That would be a prerequisite.
And then it was the SVT fed show. And what we should see is 4 nodes.
Hey, how about that?
And now we can see our lab cluster as the top 3 nodes. And we can see the far side DR cluster as a single node at this time.
That's great.
Nice, everything's got the same versions on it. Everything's got consistent IP addresses.
I'm liking what I see.
Excellent.
So we can go ahead and add those additional secondary NICs in there. Again, this is something our deployment engineer typically does before we hand over to you. But essentially, at the end of this deployment process, this is a production ready and tested infrastructure that we hand over to you, and you can begin to migrate your workload onto the cluster. So
So we'll add ourselves another management NIC, and then on the other switch we'll add another 10 gig.
Now this, what you see here, these are just standard switches. We're a virtual controller on VMware, so distributed vSwitches do work. We just don't deploy into them. So
because that would require enterprise plus licensing, and you can't guarantee customers will have.
No, you can't. So, but you can non-disruptively migrate from standard to distributed vSwitches. So.
And out here on the DR cluster, adding additional NIC to management in DR, and then in storage, and that will get us to production ready in storage in the DR data center as well.
Very good.
All right, let's just refresh that once it gets this link light up. There it is. Okay.
So now we do have workload on the production cluster. So let's pick one of our virtual machines here.
So we'll take our first Ubuntu virtual machine.
Sure. So right-click on that, and let's go to all SimpliVity actions.
Come on, web client, catch up. All right, there's our summary for him. He's all happy. Yeah, sitting at a login prompt and the little tiny text.
So one of the things that we do is we duplex writes between nodes in a cluster. So the virtual machine will have a primary and a secondary on each on nodes in the cluster. So if you scroll down there on the right-hand side, there should be a SimpliVity section.
This guy's not yet showing us those SimpliVity actions.
I'm just going to
close the web client because it's the web client, and I'm going to log back in again. Just
let's try
my experience.
Sort of like the three-finger salute for VMware?
Yeah, it's when things don't make sense in the web client, close the web client and start again. Okay. And although it's a little frustrating to wait for it to load, in my experience is that it will show things up, but even hitting all the refresh buttons don't correctly redisplay information. Because I'm a little concerned that now it's not actually loading. It's got a little clock. Let's fill some time by taking a look at the install. So the tests have completed, so I can kick off the install of the fifth node.
Here's the last node.
And then let's see if the web client's catching up. Loading some data out. Our options on. Let's try a second Ubuntu machine, the one that we did the full migrate across. Well, also doesn't show us any SimpliVity on.
Curious.
It is very curious. We've got no in-progress tasks. There are no tasks still in progress. If there's no tasks in progress, that suggests that my vApp has come across completely. And if I get the option to power him on, he's definitely come across. So we have a vApp that's migrated across. What I should do is take a quick look at how long it took for that vApp to copy across. So the clone vApp task here at the very top. I'll see if I can bring all of the columns in so we can see the start and finish time all together. What I particularly wanted to look at was how long it takes to complete these tasks. There we go, our clone vApp took, what was that, about 11:31 to 12:03, so about 30 minutes to clone to copy off the vSAN onto the SimpliVity data store. What I really liked was how much faster it is when we do that clone of the vApp while it's actually on the SimpliVity data store. So this isn't quite the way you normally demonstrate the speed of functions, but this is a half terabyte group of virtual machines. And I'm using the standard VMware UI to do this clone of this half terabyte of VMs. And
so we will utilize VAAI, but only if you have the Enterprise Plus licensing.
Which of course is, again, a VMware restriction,
That's a
not
VMware
a...
restriction, correct.
not a SimpliVity restriction. Oh, oh, come on, it's going to be called 903. It's going to live in lab. There we go. That's better.
Much better.
Just format same as source, stay on the SimpliVity data store. I better move it to a new port group, 903. Same resource allocation as the source. Go do it. So just to show you the contents of this vApp, there are 6 VMs in here, and it's this master virtual machine that is itself the nearly half a terabyte of data. And you know what we should have done? We should have shown the space utilization before the clone, done the clone, and shown the space utilization after. Because if we come in and look at that, SimpliVity.
So that's the advantage of that data virtualization. We do the work up front, then we get to leverage it every time we do go through a copy process, clone, a replication, a backup.
So we've now got 2 copies of that half terabyte VM, which is the majority of our data stored, and still only doing 2.3 to 1 data efficiency, and that's because we don't actually have any backups in place at the moment.
We have a little bit of backup.
A little bit of backup data?
Not
Oh
much.
yeah, 7 gigs. So those 2 Linux machines, the Ubuntu machines, have been backed up. Nice.
Yep. The policy's kicking in.
The policy for backups are kicking in, and we're getting some significant capacity savings and consequently I/O savings. That clone of our second vApp, so the clone of that vApp took us, what, 1 minute and 11 seconds compared to 30-some minutes to bring it into the data store.
A little bit faster.
A little faster.
Let's right-click on the production cluster and let's create a new virtual machine.
Sure. Just any old new virtual machine?
Yes. Call it what you will.
And location for the virtual machine will be in the lab cluster. It's going to live in the lab data center. Yeah. When we're allowed to, I'll select the production cluster inside the lab data center. That's our third node coming along, just to give something changing on the screen. So 21% complete. The ESXi 6.5 has been deployed out, and we're waiting for it to boot so that the deploy can then trigger the install of the OVC.
Correct.
All right, how's our UI?
We're going to do creation and configuration of those vSwitches and port groups and things of that nature. And look at that.
See, I love the web client. Gives me so much time to do other things.
Well, while this is going, do you want to look at John Gramola? And
yeah, that seems like a good idea. Should we go to the SimpliVity portfolio description? So we had John on talking earlier about the HPE software-defined portfolio, but one sector of that is SimpliVity that we're talking about, and John's got some got something to tell us about the range of the SimpliVity portfolio itself. Welcome back to another vBrownBag Build Day video. This is the HPE SimpliVity Build Day, SimpliVity 380 even. And joining me today is John Kamala. Hey John, how are you doing today?
Doing wonderful, thank you.
Excellent. Now John is ideally placed to tell us about the collection of different products that you could choose to buy in the SimpliVity portfolio. So John, just quickly your role at HPE, and let's head straight into what it is that people have the choices.
Great. I lead product management for the HyperConverged portfolio, including SimpliVity, and we've just really announced the new version of that called our SimpliVity 380 Gen 10 set of products. Great new offering that we're rolling out in 1 or 2 waves in terms of the capabilities. The first of those waves is what we call our 4000 series. These are really a new entry-level flash priced price points that we have within the portfolio that can provide all of the price performance that you're getting with a hybrid offering. Mm-hmm. So no more need for rotational drives in a lot of those systems anymore. We're providing new models of that. We've broken the model sizes down into what we call t-shirt sizing, if you want to call it that, with previously having a small, medium, and a large. We've added a new extra small version of that. Plus even 1 socket versions of that to lower price points down 20% lower than we've previously had in terms of people being able to deploy those systems.
And I'm certainly seeing a lot of discussion around having hyper-converged into smaller and smaller locations. So clearly you're seeing the same thing of that pull out into remote office, branch office, mobile office kind of, mobile office I mean planes, trains, automobiles, well not automobiles so much, but all kinds of places you wouldn't previously have had a data center technology. So that's a recognition of something I'm seeing in the market as well. I particularly like that it's all flash. It just struck me that it was not that long ago that the first SimpliVity all flash configurations were available, and now we're switching to nothing but all flash.
Yeah, it's really a case where, because of the overall breadth of the portfolio of HPE overall and our leadership in drives, particularly SSDs, that from a go-forward point of view, we see no reason to go ahead and add, for the mainstream of hyper-converged offerings, any type of rotational drives. We can get prices that are right in line with that, but get significant improvements in performance, which is a benefit for folks. Again, that's in the 4000 series. We additionally have a 6000 series. That 6000 series will have even better performance overall from a sustained performance point of view than that 4000 series.
Right, so the 4000 is in those t-shirt sizes. Is the 6000 also in those same t-shirt sizes?
Most all of the t-shirt sizes are going to be available for both. The one scenario that's not likely, the 6000 extra small probably won't be a model, but the rest are really there because they meet great customer use cases, given all the different desires there are for hyper-converged offerings with customers.
And then you mentioned the single socket. The other thing that we talked about a little beforehand was that these Gen 10 servers free up a bit more space inside compared to prior releases, and that's about getting some more PCI Express.
Yeah, so ideally you get all of those benefits that you're used to with the ProLiant DL380 Gen 10. So it's not only more I/O capabilities. For instance, we can put a graphics accelerator card and NVIDIA graphics card in there. Awesome configuration for VDI-like deployments.
High performance VDI.
Yeah, absolutely. We can get more memory compared to previous. The Gen 10 does that. You've got the latest performance Skylake processors. Smart Array controllers are there natively as part of that. So all of those capabilities that you're used to are there. Even data at rest encryption available as an option associated with Smart Array. So everything that you know and love with Gen 10.
Data at rest encryption in the Smart Array controller, not using self-encrypting SSDs.
Yeah, it is related to the Smart Array controller, linking to higher level enterprise security key managers as well. So all of those great Gen 10 capabilities, including not only that data encryption, but you can have the silicon root of trust capabilities that you've got on Gen 10 as well, to meet all of your different needs. So all of the great benefits that you've known and loved with ProLiant Gen 10 also reflected here, and even delivering greater capability with SimpliVity 380 Gen 10 as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, John. Keep tuned, stay tuned with us for more videos around the SimpliVity 380 build day. And we'll look forward to seeing probably more of John in other videos as well.
Thank you.
So there's the range of products that you can get with SimpliVity. Our cluster is still here and operational, and we want to set up some more things. We were discussing while you were watching, John, that we want to set up backup policies that actually protect across the two data centers. Since we have a 3+1 right now, but shortly a 3+2, we better actually use that to provide us that disaster recovery. So where do I go to set those policies?
Well, there's, like the web client, there's multiple ways to get to it. The way I like to do it is go to that home menu and scroll down to where it says Federation, HPE SimpliVity Federation, and then you can click on the backup policies on the left-hand side. Now, essentially what we're doing is we're going to create a new copy of our virtual machine data at the disaster recovery data center. So that essentially what we will do is add a rule for the primary cluster to add a backup to this DR cluster, the production cluster to the DR cluster.
So, and I think my vBrownBag awesome policy needs to be a bit more awesome than I've got it so far.
Well, we're getting ready to make it so. There you go. So hit
Because
that
I
edit.
think I actually want
Now,
to
if you
edit
change
this rule first.
That current rule uses the keyword local, which will use whatever VMware cluster that VM is on currently, and we'll store the backup on that cluster. So, but with a simple change, we can make it so that your awesome policy gets even more awesomer.
Well,
and we
I'm
can use it
starting by
across-
saying I want to back up every 10 minutes.
Well, there you go. You can do that.
Okay, let's do that.
We can do that. So now change that keyword local to.
How about I create a new one?
We can do that too.
And this is,
And then now use the DR.
you know, I've got a really fast network to my DR environment, so I think I'm going to go
You're
every
going to
10
do that
minutes.
10 minutes there too.
But I'm going to retain that for 5 days, so I've got lots of places I could return to.
Okay. You're making a lot of changes in your environment.
Oh,
Go ahead, if you change that keyword local to the production cluster, now you could use that same policy in both
this one.
data stores, and you don't have to create here. Now
Although
your
I've got
awesome policy has just become awesome in 2 places.
Oh, in that case, if I'm going to change this
That's
one
right.
to be my production side, I guess I should also only I should have the same retention at the 2. Well, I guess I know how much capacity I have at each data center, and so I can have longer retention at the place that I know I have more
It
capacity.
all comes down to your use case and what you're trying to do.
All right, I'm going to just keep my month's worth of
Yep.
retention and production. And so if I'm running some VMs in my DR data center using that same policy, it's going to push data back to my production data center.
That's correct.
Nice.
So here we're giving you a prediction of how we anticipate that to alter your growth over time.
So my consumption is still in the acceptable
Yep.
space.
And so there you go.
Excellent.
So let's hop back, go to the VMs and clusters, or hosting clusters.
And I was thinking we haven't got a data store at the DR side. I should probably create a data store at the DR.
Need a data store over there.
Yeah,
That's usually part of the post-install checks.
It's still not showing me my.
Is it the DR cluster?
That's the DR cluster. And the
Right-click.
plugin is showing
No
odd
actions.
behavior. It's still
That's
having
curious.
some
Hit
challenges
the
with that
refresh
plugin.
button on that.
You want to hit this refresh button up here? How about that one? Yeah, plugins to the web client should be nice and reliable, but it's the web client.
It's working for you?
All right. And of course, it'll take a little while to load that all up. And to load that.
So the audience will have to forgive me for not creating the data store. Let's go right click.
Still showing the same appearance because I have a slightly different appearance. Brian,
We can do it from the command line if you want.
yeah, would Brian will off camera create us our data store because his web client is behaving for him. So it's clearly an issue with maybe it doesn't like my machine today. All right. We wanted to do some things about protecting these VMs as well.
Correct. So right click on that Ubuntu One VM. I don't want to damage it. So do the all SimpliVity actions and say clone virtual machine. And you can give it a fancy name, leave it there, whatever you want to call it.
We'll call it Ubuntu 3.
Okay. And just say finish. And now we'll clone that virtual machine. You should see it pop up there in just a second. So interesting, and I think this was illustrated in the DVP video that we just saw, but a backup, a restore, and a clone actually all exercise the same code path within SimpliVity. The only difference is whether the hypervisor sees the source or destination. So we did a clone, and so you can see the virtual machine there. If you click on the Configure tab and go to HPE SimpliVity Search Backups, we won't see any backups for this virtual machine most likely because we just created it. So you can right click on it and go to all SimpliVity actions and say backup virtual machine. You can go ahead and use the keyword local. There you go.
Name the backup.
And now do the same thing and use the keyword or use a
Destination.
DR cluster as a destination. You don't really need to give it a name. That's an optional field.
Oh, okay. I always
It'll
like,
fill that in.
hey, you got to name something, you got to name it.
Because we're
Send
attached
it
to our
to the,
backups. You're really attached to your backups because you're taking them every 10 minutes.
Oh yeah, well, I'm taking them even more frequently manually.
Yeah.
So look at that.
And so now what's happened is we've taken for Ubuntu 3, that virtual machine is, I think you said it was 4 or 5 gig, yeah, to the hypervisor, but in our file system, it's really pointers into the unique data at the hardware layer. So we're taking that pointer-based file, sometimes called a VM container file. I just call it the recipe for the virtual machine. We've shipped it over to the DR cluster. The DR cluster is essentially analyzing the contents of that and figuring out what unique data it already has and what unique data needs to transfer over the network. And so what's happening is it'll request that data to be transferred over the network, but only the unique data. So an interesting consequence.
Only the unique data it doesn't already have. Yeah.
Only unique data it doesn't already have. So an interesting consequence of the SimpliVity SAN level replication, if you will, is that we will only replicate data 0 or 1 time. Unique data only traverses the network once or never, right? If the data already exists in a remote location, there's no need for it to go over the network. If it doesn't already exist, we only need to send it once. So we have a case study that we did for a company that uses this on floating rigs in the Gulf. They're able to do, I think, 10 terabyte backups every day over a 1.5 megabit satellite connection. I think it's actually slower than the guest network that we were using here.
Hundreds of milliseconds of latency as well.
600 milliseconds of latency. We're the only technology that could achieve it. We made a case study out of this. Maybe we can provide the link in the recording. But essentially, we're able to achieve that because we only need to send the net new unique data that central site has never seen before. And it doesn't really matter how that data got created there. It could have been created by live virtual machines in that site. It could have been created by replication from another site. It's really irrelevant. It just matters that it's there.
Out on the rig, it was created by VMs being migrated off a legacy system onto this.
Correct.
Originally. But if you had similar VMs back on shore.
What they actually did was, what I understand is they did an image level restore at the central location.
Right.
And then they did a data center migration 200 miles offshore. So a live migration onto the SimpliVity nodes, and then began replicating. And so all we needed to do was replicate the net new unique blocks that were created since the backup point in time. So they were able to achieve that over that. Prior to that, they were sending a helicopter out there, which is kind of pricey.
Rather expensive.
So if you scroll to the right here, you'll see that you see our 2 backups. You see that they're manual, and you can see the amount of capacity that we had to send. Hit the search backups there again and refresh that. So you can see to protect the 2.5 gig, we only had to send 1.2 gig. It took about 30 seconds. That's pretty common. So to prove that these are really backups, let's go right-click on your Ubuntu 3 virtual machine and go to Delete from Disk.
Sure.
It's funny that Delete from Disk and Remove from Inventory are
right
next to
beside
each other. They both pop up a dialog that says yes, no. But let's say this was something more cynical, like a crypto locker or something like that.
Sure.
I have a customer based out of Lafayette, and when does crypto locker hit? It hits you when you're on vacation with your family on a Friday afternoon. And he was at the beach with his family when he got the call from the office. I call that a weekend wrecker call. That's the one you wish you didn't answer, right? But he did the right thing. He answered. And normally, you would think that you're telling the wife and kids, I'll see you later, enjoy the weekend, I'm going to go work. He had to go to 5 different recovery points. And let's face it, it's pretty unanimous when it comes to crypto locker that the best way to recover from it is not to get hit with it in the first place.
Yes.
Or if you do get hit with it, then you better have retention.
Well, you hand in your notice and never return to work.
Or, well, we don't want that one. So this is where SimpliVity really excels, because it's very convenient for us and efficient for us to have multiple backup point times that we can recover to. My customer had to go to 5 different recovery points. And if you can think about
keep rolling back.
He had to keep rolling back. And if you can think about the normal amount of time that would take.
For any kind of bulk copy restore, it's going to be nasty.
It would just take a long time. But he had his environment back up and running in 25 minutes. He never had to leave the beach.
And that's with 5, essentially 5 restores before finding good.
That was with 5 restores. So in the process that he went through, if you right-click on that DR cluster, and that is not going to be there. So there's something with the web client. Let's try it this way. I've never done it this way, but right-click on the production cluster. And yeah, we're not going to be able to see the backups that got sent. Right-click.
So we've got all of our backups here. So
Yeah, this is showing you the production cluster.
Yeah.
So it doesn't look like we're going to see the DR cluster.
But if I've got a backup in here, I can.
You can do it there. So find your Ubuntu 3, and then you can go to restore virtual machine.
My manual backup.
There it is. So say restore virtual machine. Create a new VM, and this time stick it in there.
Whatever. Oh, right. So create a new virtual machine and choose.
There we go.
Put it across in the DR cluster.
Yep. And now you can say OK. So now we're restoring that virtual machine into the disaster recovery cluster. And so, in his, one of the points in our hyper guarantee is we guarantee that you can back up or restore locally a 1 terabyte VM in less than 60 seconds. I do a demo it's a demo rig. It's not it is live equipment, but it's not customer data. We actually do have workload generators in there, but I think it takes about 4 to 8 seconds to restore this virtual machine in the remote cluster. One time I did a clone operation. It took 20 seconds when normally it's never taken longer than 12.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you that when I was doing that demo, I was in an absolute panic for 6 or 7 seconds. But no, it's great. The fact that we're virtualizing that data, we're doing the hard work up front, and then we're leveraging that hard work across the core IT capabilities of backup, replication, restore. That makes us very efficient in terms of operating the environment. I think there's something with your
my web client's misbehaving, but we have had that restore. The VM has come back.
Yep. And so let's click on one of those nodes there in the production cluster, and there should be a tab, HPE. That's the SimpliVity virtual machines. Is there one for the hardware? Is there a monitor tab? Go to the monitor tab. There we go, HPE SimpliVity hardware. So one of the things you'll notice here is that we have RAID sets with the drives are configured in RAID. So as I mentioned earlier, we protect data with really kind of a belts and suspenders approach to steal, the way Brian puts it. And so we have RAIN and RAID. So we RAIN data between nodes, and we protect the data on each node.
So RAIN is the redundant array of independent nodes.
So we're basically duplexing data across nodes, and then we're protecting that data on each node with RAID. Now, as a consequence, we can lose any 3 drives within a cluster. So very, very good attention to data availability, because we in IT have to play a game that I like to call "Don't Lose the Data." So the business entrusts us with the data, and we better be able to
return the data to
still have it, right? We know that components fail, and so we proactively plan for those failures using technologies like RAID. And so with the traditional hyper-converged approach, if you're using RF2 or RF3 without RAID, you're closer to your data unavailability, data loss situations. So what we can do is we can lose any 3 simultaneous drives within a cluster, and I think that we're going to actually demonstrate that by pulling some drives in the cluster at some point.
Complete out all of the other pieces of content before we start pulling drives out of things. I know it works.
It's fun. Come on.
But yes, let's.
Looks like I see our second node in the DR cluster.
Let's just check whether the deploy is completed. So we've deployed 4 nodes out. Brian's deployed 1 for us. We have our
5 for 5.
5 nodes deployed out. We better set this guy up for production use as well. So we need to add his additional redundant uplinks out of the switches. And I suspect the reason we saw a little bit of a delay for that Ubuntu machine being restored, it could have been happening as the second node was joining to the cluster. And we want a second 10 gig NIC. That's him. So we now have our 3+2 all configured up. Nice. And while we're here, what do we see in monitor? Oh, I'm still not getting the
That's
SimpliVity
crazy.
plugins on the client side. Well, at some point in the near future, when we take a break, I'll just close out Chrome completely. How's our capacity looking? So we're up to 2 terabytes of stored data because we've got a few backups that run on our
This is a key
increments.
concept, that we're virtualizing data across all 3 of these tiers of storage. So you have the purple bar at the top is your primary data or production
The actual
data.
VMs.
Yep, the actual virtual machines. The little orange bar in the middle would be your backup space, and then the bottom, I don't even know what color that is.
Greenish
bar is, think of that as your replication target space, right?
Right.
And so probably one of the most interesting and sometimes complex discussions, just like with server virtualization, we don't need as many server resources, compute and memory and such that we used to need.
Sharing and pooling.
That's right.
That requires less resource.
Exactly, and that's what part of what leads to that physical consolidation. The same thing applies to data virtualization, and right now data virtualization is new, so sometimes it's hard to understand that I don't need as many terabytes as I used to need. And this is a really good illustration of why, because SimpliVity is virtualizing the data across all 3 of those tiers, and so sometimes we'll run into a situation where we've properly sized an environment based on the workload that's there, but a lot of times customers, and you know this, customers aren't using as much as they think they're using.
Yes.
Right? I do not think you're using as much as you think you're using. And so we're in that interesting situation of explaining, well, I know you've got 15 terabytes allocated, but you're using 2. And this is the appropriate size.
Or you're doing things like you've got a SQL dump and a SQL database.
Right.
And it's the same data in 2 locations inside the VM. Well, that's going to wash out to being 1 copy of the unique data in the system.
And so those kinds of things, typically the way it manifests itself is they look at the capacity they're getting with the SimpliVity solution, and they compare that to a legacy mentality, and they're saying, well, I'm not getting as much over here as I am over here. And this is the key to why you don't need as much. We sized conservatively. We look at that purple bar at the top. We sized really conservatively with that data. We guarantee 10-to-1 in our end-user license agreement across all 3 tiers. But our customer average is somewhere between 37 and 42-to-1, and about 20% of our customers get 100-to-1 or better.
And presumably the more aggressive my backup schedule is.
That's exactly correct.
The,
Sometimes the competition dings us and say, oh, y'all have to have backups to inflate your data efficiency numbers. But I say, well, wait a minute, you're criticizing me for something you can't do. I'll take that. I'll be criticized for that all day long. So
and the bottom line is,
the key
is it beneficial to customers?
It's beneficial to customers. It makes a difference. And the key is that we're managing that metadata across all 3. If you think about it, unique data and whether it belongs to a backup or a live VM or both, is changing on a constant basis as data is created in the live virtual machines. And we're managing that complexity for you. It's not something that's ever exposed. And so we're managing all of that unique data across all 3 classes of storage.
Okay. And I think while we get Firefox and Chrome and the web browser to behave, we should probably go to another of the recorded segments. So let's take a look at the coming hardware. This box we've got behind us is a ProLiant Gen 10, and we've got a look at that hardware. If you'd like to run that one for us, please, Jeffrey. Welcome back to the vBrownBag Build Day with HPE SimpliVity. I'm joined by my friend Richard. How are you doing, Richard?
Pretty good. Great to be back with you.
It is. It's always nice to have customers who like us to show more products, and HPE's got such a lot of products. So this is the new tin, the new hardware that we have?
Exactly. This is the new HPE SimpliVity 380 Gen 10 platform. It has all the SimpliVity technology of always-on dedupe, compression, and backup, but it has all the ProLiant Gen 10 features as well. So it's a great product, and it just came out recently.
And this is the going forward platform for all of the SimpliVity products as we're progressing through.
Correct. Yep. This is where our SimpliVity technology is going to be right now. As you can see, we can open it up and take a look at it.
Let's do that.
There's several new features here. Essentially, you have new size options. There's an extra small in addition to small, medium, and large. The extra small being new. There's also single socket CPU support. There's an integrated HPE Smart Array controller. So we can also support a new VDI graphics card. Let's open it up and take a look.
me take that one away.
So here we go. We're inside the system. As you can see, here's kind of the ProLiant Gen 10 features. We have all the redundant fans, redundant power supplies. In the front, we have different storage options. We have an extra small or small with all the hard drives currently in it. As you can see, this one only has a single CPU. That was not supported in the Gen 9, but it's a new feature for Gen 10. It kind of opens it up, the SimpliVity, to new customers, possibly remote and branch office, which plays so well with the backup capabilities.
And reducing the cost of the vSphere licensing can be a really significant thing as well for customers.
That as well, yep. So kind of move here to the back. First of all, here's the most important part, the Omni Accelerator card. This is where all the built-in deduping, compression, and optimization happens. We can take it out and take a look at it.
And you can think of that as an offload card for the data efficiency.
Exactly. It's hardware dedicated for the deduping, compression, and optimization. It's not offloaded to a CPU where performance may vary. This is designed specifically for the SimpliVity solution. So here we have the card, we have super caps, everything else.
And I think we're going to do a video where we dig a little more into that card. So we won't spend too long looking at it now. Have a look in the YouTube channel and you'll find some more detail on just that card.
Exactly. We have a smart array controller here, which controls our boot drives in the back. This is where all the SimpliVity software and hypervisor resides.
And having that in the back is a new feature. They used to be front-facing, taking up that real estate in the front.
Exactly. So now all the drives in the front are dedicated for customer data usage.
So that's where all your VM data is going to reside, whereas the actual boot stuff's sitting out here at the back. Nice.
Yep, it's in the back. So here we have our smart array controller. This is for the storage drives. It's important because now you see the secondary rides are completely empty, and one of the options we can use in here is a Tesla NVIDIA M10 graphics card.
Right, and that'll be for the VDI use cases where you have graphically intensive desktops and you don't want to soak up all of the CPU power in the machine. You just offload it to the hardware GPUs.
Exactly.
Nice. And that's, in earlier versions, that was a tricky thing to put into the platform.
Correct. So that is a new feature with Gen 10, a lot of improvements there, and it will takes away a lot of the challenges.
Right. What else have we got in here?
We have the different networking in the back. 10 gig, 1 gig ILO.
Right.
Redundant power supplies.
So we've got 4 1 gigs and 2 10 gig as the standard configuration.
In this configuration,
and then we could choose to put additional expansion cards in this riser where we talked about putting the GPUs, but you could put other things in there.
Exactly. It's optional for the customer, and that's certainly something else they can put if they need more networking.
Right. Nice and clean. Lots of DIMM slots, so I can imagine check it out with a lot of RAM.
There's a lot of options there, up to 1.5 terabytes, so depending on what the customer needs.
Nice. Anything else that we've missed?
I think those are the highlights. Again, yeah, this is the really cool SimpliVity technology.
Yeah, and then it's got all of the usual ProLiant features of ILO on it, so you've got out-of-band management, and we're working here with all of the hardware sitting in the data center behind us, and so the ILO has been our way of operating the whole way through.
Exactly. It's got all the ProLiant Gen 10 features. So first of all, it's just very reliable, very engineered product. They will last a long time, and it combines all that with the deduping compression.
And then all of the fleet management features that you get with the management stack that sits on top of the ProLiants as well.
Right.
Well, I think that concludes our tour of the hardware. Thank you, Richard. There'll be lots more SimpliVity 380 videos. We're going to have some fun with these things.
Yes, definitely.
So while we're talking about hardware, we should talk a little bit more. We've talked a little bit in the video with Richard about the onboard the OmniStack Accelerator card, but
yeah.
you've got it here. Tell us a little more about it.
I've got one here. So yeah, you can think of this as this is an offload engine. An analogy would be a 3D graphics card that you put into a workstation at work or maybe a gaming rig at home. What you're doing is offloading those complex graphics operations onto the graphics card. You're getting better performance and you're getting more consistent performance under load. That's exactly analogous to this. This is a card that we made. We offload the complex data operations onto this card, and as a consequence, we get better performance and we get more consistent performance under load. Exact same analogy. There's really only 4 aspects to this card. The first thing is what goes right here is the DIMM. All of our writes go through the DIMM. It is volatile, right? And so that's why literally half of the card, as you can see here, is supercapacitors. So these supercapacitors will power the card in the event of a power failure to the node, and they'll destage the committed writes from the volatile memory into non-volatile memory, which usually fits right in here. And so the last component on the card is actually the FPGA, or field programmable gate array, which is what does all the complex operations in the first place, right? While we offload that, that's right there. So those are the only 4 components on the card. It's a very simple and clean design. And interestingly, initially in I think it was the 2015 Gartner Magic Quadrant, Gartner really didn't understand the card, but in the 2016 Magic Quadrant, they really came back and recognized the card as a benefit and a competitive advantage for SimpliVity.
So given that there's just one of these in each of my nodes, what happens when there's a problem with it?
So that was my first question, believe it or not, when I interviewed with SimpliVity, is explain to me why this is not a single point of failure. And the reason it's not is because data will be replicated between nodes. So this is actually presented up to our virtual controller through that direct path IO, right? And so the writes will be duplexed from one virtual controller to another. They'll be in 2 places. So if something happens to this accelerator card, that data is already, that data will not be acknowledged to the writing hypervisor until it's been committed in both nodes. And so if something happens to this accelerator card, then that write exists in another node in the cluster. And essentially what will happen is a virtual controller storage IP address will fail over from the failed virtual controller to the other virtual controller. And so that's how we avoid this being a single point of failure.
Excellent.
And again, once you have 2 or more nodes in a cluster, it's not a single point of failure.
Right. And of course, if you only have one node in the cluster, you've got a single point of failure anyway.
And this is not your only one, right?
Yes.
Exactly correct.
Well, let's leap back into the lab. We ran to that video because Chrome and the web client were being unhappy together. Now that I've closed Chrome and reopened the web client completely, things are a little happier.
Figure that out. They're happy.
So our status was that we had a virtual machine that's Ubuntu 3 in the production cluster that had been backed up manually to the local production cluster as well as to the DR cluster. For some reason, it got deleted out of the production cluster, possibly because it got infected or some other careless activities. And we've restored it from the backup in the production cluster into the DR cluster. What did we want to do next with this multi-moved VM?
So that's exactly correct. We could have restored it if this could have had access to it, but we could have restored it locally in there. But typically, like you can right-click on that and say Move Virtual Machine.
So this is the restored virtual machine?
That's the restored virtual machine. So right-click All SimpliVity Actions, Move Virtual Machine, and now pick a data store that's in the production cluster. So I think that's your 1-1.
It only offers me the remote
well,
data
because
store.
it knows we're moving and we've only got 2 data centers. So you can say OK. This is essentially the exact same process. You could think of it as failback replication, but we're taking the container file for the live virtual machine, sending that back to the production cluster. The same process is happening. We're analyzing the data that's in that local, in the production cluster data store, and then unique data will be replicated from the DR cluster back into the production cluster. Because again, we don't know, data may have changed. I don't think you powered the machine on, but data may have changed between the time that we restored that virtual machine, took that back up and restored it in the DR cluster. And so this is another example of complexity that SimpliVity has assumed. It becomes essentially functionally eliminated as far as the user is concerned, because normally when you do SAN level replication, what do? You go allocate space as a primary volume. You go to your target array, you allocate space.
Replication.
You have to create a pair. You have to wait for the synchronization. And if you ever have to break the pair, you have to maintain some kind of consistency between. SimpliVity is managing all that complexity internal to the product. So all you have to do is specify where you want your data, how often.
So I didn't have to, in this case, to do, we did a failover essentially when we did a restore into the DR site. When we've gone to fail back, we haven't had to turn around the replication, wait for a re-replication.
That's exactly correct. And we're not doing it at the volume level. We're doing it exactly where we want it to be. Everything we do is VM-centric. And so it's really, I call it the most effective SAN level replication on the planet. I kind of got my start in doing data center migrations at the SAN level, and this is really the most efficient thing that I've ever seen, and the easiest to use, quite frankly.
All right, so we've got our 3+2 up. We've got VMs that have been migrated off our legacy environment onto the SimpliVity Federation. We've got them backed up from one location to another. Let's just take another look at those backups, because a few 10 minutes have passed, and so when we have a look at all of the backups on our primary data center, we should see quite a lot of backups have pushed across, and we can see a couple of dozen backups.
Should give you a number down there on the bottom.
Yeah, 48 backups.
There we go.
Have completed in the time that we've had this up.
Yep.
So that's a fair amount of activity going on.
Pretty good. And if you're into programming, extensibility, RESTful APIs, you can point your web browser to the one of the SimpliVity virtual controllers, and you can actually do everything that we just did, clicky in the user interface. You could automate through a REST API. There you go. So click on that, and then accept the self-signed certificate. You got to do that. And so here you can see we have APIs related to backups, data stores, hosts, etc. If you click on that, it'll show you exactly what verbs you can use. If you click on one of the verbs, it'll tell you the parameters, give you an example fields that you can choose, and give you the opportunity to actually try it out with live data. So,
right. Nice.
Yeah, it's pretty neat.
Lots of options, and if I just hit the try it out stuff.
Yep. So you got a 401 response code, which probably because you didn't log into the user interface. If you scroll to the top.
Scroll to the top.
Yep.
And hit the
login button.
Well, that's good. I'm glad I got denied when I wasn't authenticated. Lab.local, password.
And the UI will put you in timeout if you don't use it over a certain amount of time. So you'll have to log in back in. But yeah, now you can go to your Get Backups. Scroll down and
scroll all the way to the bottom,
There's a lot you can
and then
do
come back up
one.
again.
So try it out. Now you should get a status code 200 with a bunch of data.
And then there's that bunch of backups.
Bunch of backups.
Cool. So that would allow me to integrate the SimpliVity platform with whatever third-party automation tools I have.
We have VRA plugins. If you have your own type automation.
So you've got some already built plugins that will call this API for other tools, and of course, clearly a very accessible API through
And
Swagger here.
I love the fact that you can get this across even your backups and restores, because that's normally really complicated, and you don't see that kind of automation for those kind of capabilities.
All right. Well, I think we've shown an awful lot here.
Do I get to pull drives
No.
Please.
So one of the things that we have alluded to a lot is that RAID plus RAIN means that in each RAID set we can pull out some disks, and we've got enough SSDs in each of the nodes that we're running RAID 6, which would allow us to cope with 2 failures in each node.
Correct.
And then as long as we don't fail a whole node, we can do that in every node.
That's actually true.
And then
I don't like to think that way, but that's technically, that's correct.
And then going to this is the potentially worst day you've ever had in your life. You could fail a whole node, and that's when you're going to get an HA event.
Yep.
But you could pull disks out of every node until, or 2 disks out of every node, and things would still operate.
That's correct.
You want to go and do that, don't you?
Please.
Unfortunately, we haven't got a video camera set up to go out and catch that. But what we will see, I don't think our Wi-Fi will reach that far today, Jeffrey. We've been commenting on how slow the vBrownBag Wi-Fi that I have in here is. So I think we just send an engineer out to go and do the unthinkable and pull an SSD out of some live servers and see what alerts we get.
So I think, you did that for us, Brian?
Brian's going to go out as our...
And I think if we click on the host there in the production cluster, and go to the summary tab, I believe.
Watch for some alerts on the summary tab.
Yeah, we'll just see.
You'd hope that there'd be something to show up and let us know there was a problem.
So here's a happy host. It's very happily doing exactly what it should be, which is converting electricity into something useful and heat.
Hey, does Brian know which SimpliVity nodes out there we're working with?
We'll find out shortly, I guess.
Yeah, if nothing turns up red, then we'll be worried for something else. And
Well,
then
we won't be worried, but somebody else might be.
Gitiere will be rather worried as Brian pulls disks out of other people's environments.
Considering that Brian's organized this whole thing for us the whole week, I'm pretty sure
I'm pretty sure
exactly where
Brian
it
has
falls.
been a very good project manager, and we've got
Really
a
has.
fairly extensive list of things to complete. Whoop, we've got something.
Uh-oh, here
So-
we go.
Node 3 here is on the top of the pile and the most accessible. So yeah, we've got some critical failures.
Yeah, look at that.
Critical storage failures. Node 2. Oh, they're
Oh,
all
they're all
gone.
lighting up
They're all
now.
lighting up. What did you do?
It's all Brian's fault.
So
So you could go to the hardware tab, go to the monitor,
monitor issues.
go to the SimpliVity
hardware.
Now we should see something other than normal.
Well, yeah.
Isn't that special?
Physical drive 1 missing. Life remaining
look
not
at that.
applicable. Missing. So we've got 2 disks missing out of that
I
RAID
know what
6.
you did last summer.
So Brian, you pulled what, 6 SSDs out of those 3 nodes, 2 out of each? Yeah, and not all in the same place apparently.
Nope.
Go to one of the
Point of that.
consoles on your virtual machine. Let's just make sure that's.
Well, let's. You know what I should have done? I should have migrated this Windows 7 machine in so everything was happening on top of this.
Oh yeah.
Let's open the console on my Linux machine, and if I can remember my password in here, I wonder if I typed that right.
Now, it's key here to understand that at this point, even though 6 drives have been pulled, there's been no data loss, right? This is really important because the difference between RAID and no RAID is what I like to call data loss. Like what you're experiencing right now with your password, I would classify that as data loss.
Yeah, my grey hair is showing through, and I'm struggling to remember what password I set on this machine. However, because it
But
is,
you can see it's responding, right?
it is responsive.
So we still have 2 full replicas of the virtual machines that are running in that cluster.
Nope, that's not
data's
what I
still
wanted
available.
for user ID. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm fairly sure I created a vBrownBag account, and maybe I used the vBrownBag password. There it is.
Oh, look at there.
Look at that, I've still got some space.
This is good.
I've still got files. In fact, I've got files all over the place. There's files all up the wazoo here.
All right, I would call this success.
I would say we've still got a running virtual machine despite the fact that we pulled 6 SSDs out of 3 hosts and did that within 1 minute. All right, well, I would count this as being a very successful build day for the HPE SimpliVity. In our just on 4 hours now since we began, we have deployed 5 nodes, we've migrated virtual machines in, we've backed them up, we've restored them, we've even done hardware
Got to do
failure
a little
in
bit
here.
of troubleshooting in there.
We had some troubleshooting along the way. It wouldn't be a build day if we didn't have to troubleshoot problems along the way.
Like we say, if it doesn't break, you don't learn anything.
Exactly. And we also have not gotten to all of the pre-recorded content.
Exactly.
So those of you who've been following along the stream, hi. There is more content we'll be posting up onto YouTube in the next few days into a nice brand new playlist for the build day for HPE SimpliVity. Jeffrey is going to be doing all of that hard work over the next couple of days, or maybe next week once he gets home.
Maybe tomorrow.
Maybe
On
tomorrow.
the plane as we go.
Ooh, yeah, go in flight. So watch out for those. There's, I think, 6 videos that we didn't get to. Some really good stuff exposing the insides of the data virtualization platform. So we got some fairly superficial stuff, or some that's sufficient, but for inquiring minds, we go a little deeper.
Yep.
And there's also some really interesting more around what's coming and what's future in the portfolio, and a whole heap of other good content as just I'm looking at it. So we've got another probably half an hour's worth of video that'll go up there as well.
Yep, that deep dive on the data virtualization platform is very worthwhile and insightful in understanding the deep level of engineering that went into the SimpliVity platform, and I'd highly encourage that.
And that's, you know, I talked about having advanced laziness in what I do. I like the idea of advanced simplicity, where it's very simple to operate the platform, but there's a whole heap of science going on underneath. And there are some incredibly smart people in engineering who made it all work. This, to me, is the right balance. You have a relatively small number of incredibly smart people who make it easy for the rest of us.
It really is. I'm really, I have to say, I'm very prideful of the work that SimpliVity Engineering put into the product. It's one of the best engineered products that I've worked with. And Yeah, I'll give you an example, right? You mentioned the term iceberg earlier on. One of the iceberg questions that I always hated getting from customers was, help me upgrade VMware. Because it's very easy to ask on above the surface, but under the surface it touches everything and it's a complex mess. The beautiful thing with the way SimpliVity's worked this whole thing, you basically go down one list and say what version you want to get to. We'll tell you which versions of SimpliVity that supports, and now you've got your path to basically get from where you are to where you need to be. Yeah,
Nice.
It's nice and simple.
Thanks also to the people you haven't seen on camera today or at all. So Gyuri has been really good at helping us get all of the infrastructure together and has been really responsive and helpful. You haven't seen on camera today Richard or Brian, but you've seen them in the recorded sessions. And the person we never see on camera, but we always love to see, Becca Taylor hiding down the back.
Yay!
Thank you very much for being a host to us all. So I think we're all done here. Thank you very much, Marcel.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, and keep watching for more vBrownBag videos and more vBrownBag build days.
Thanks, guys.